background to the Attlee-Truman discussions, 1 million people cram New York Central Park to hear the president outline America's stand on atomic power.
There has been talk about the atomic bomb. We must find the answer to the problems created by the release of atomic energy. Indeed, the highest hope of the American people is that world cooperation for peace will soon reach such a state of perfection that atomic methods of destruction can be definitely and effectively outlawed forever.
Осталось 10, 9, 8, 7, 1, 0. Нажатие кнопки, все осветилось ярчайшим.
Far beyond normal shipping routes they lie, and until 1952, only pearl fishing boats entered the blue waters and left the cliffs surrounding their shores.
Censored by the French authorities, but this picture is impressive evidence of the bomb.
The great result of the cooperation of education with research. This is another victory.
Emergency alert system capabilities.
This is an emergency action notification.
National Alert and Warning Authorities, in coordination with emergency alert system participants.
My fellow Americans, as you know, our attempts at preventing nuclear war have failed.
Finally, Mars has accepted my sacrifices and unleashes me.
I see you, enemy. I see you, enemy. Enemy! Enemy! You are my enemy! And I swear total resistance to you with everything I've got. Disingenuous, fake, false, broke back, twisted, a defiler, a betrayer, a backstabber, a devil! You will pay. Yeah, you think I don't see your face, scum? You don't think I don't see you? I see you, you understand me? I know what you think of me and my family. I see you right back. You understand that? You understand that? You will fall! You will not bring humanity down! God is going to destroy you!
Gotta get into my work. I got a special one for you. It's got history, it's got politics, it's got Nazis, it's got somebody that everybody hates, and I'm not talking about Mustache Man. I'm talking about the creator. Yeah, so we'll watch that, but I want to watch one or two quick short videos first. And just get into my work. What do we got here? What do we got? Okay. There he is. There he is. Let's go.
Like individual right-wingers get mad at people like this. Charlie Kirk on the deadly Texas flooding. The death toll likely would not have been as high if it wasn't for DEI.
The Democrats, they're so despicable.
In Texas, dude? Really? DEI in Texas? Are you saying Governor Greg Abbott is in a wheelchair? Is he doing the thing? He's like, Governor Greg Abbott is handicapped. We shouldn't have had him as governor. We need a governor who can dive into the water and swim and extract people himself, personally.
The Democrats are not lifting a finger to remember the well over 100 people that have died in Texas Hill Country. What you are not being told by the media anywhere is that the death toll likely would not have been as high if it wasn't for DEI. This Texas tragedy is just the latest example. It's not just incompetence.
Yeah, DEI, divert extreme investment. Divert extreme investment to Israel. That's what the I stands for. It stands for both investment and Israel. That's what it is. That's what he's talking about. We have never had more stupid people in the White House than we do now.
As a federal government.
Oh my Lord. Oh my Lordy Lordy. Oh my God.
This is DEI working to undermine meritocratic institutions. And
brother, this is Texas. Wait, Texas is also doing DEI? What's he talking about? Did he think that this was California? What does he mean when he says DEI? Is he talking about divert environmental investment? DEI, divert everything to Israel? Is there something going on in Texas that I was oblivious to? Is Texas also doing DEI now? What? It's a red state. Texas is so woke, they had a whole country full of Mexicans settle next door. I know. Some of them, when we drew the lines, remained in Texas, as a matter of fact. Hella Mexicans there. Teleprompter got the wrong script. Yeah, I'll have you know, there are Mexicans in Texas, dude.
More people likely died than otherwise would have because of DEI.
This kind of commentary also is a direct consequence of people getting dumber and dumber year over year, where like he doesn't even need to make an argument. Have you noticed that there is no argument being made here? There is no correlation. There's not even a correlation. You can't even say like correlation does not mean causation. At least back in the day, they used to point to something. They used to like point to a correlation falsely. They would do false equivalencies. They would do like silly ways of implementing logical fallacies to make a somewhat of a convincing argument. Now, it's just catchphrases, man. This is DEI. DEI is the reason why this is as bad as it is. And also because wokes. Yeah, woke DEI in the state of Texas. Yeah, this is why Ben fell off. This is precisely why Ben Shapiro fell off, because at least he was like trying to make...
To be fair, there is woke DEI in Texas. It's just very controlled for. If you go to Austin, if you go to Dallas, if you go to San Antonio, where I live, if you go to Houston, if you go to probably El Paso as well, those are big cities, and you're going to have woke DEI shit going on over there for sure. We definitely have woke DEI shit going on here in San Antonio. I could definitely tell you that. But the rest of the state, no, there's no woke DEI shit. Now, these floods happened in Kirk County in a town called Kerrville, which is actually about 45 minutes to an hour northwest of me here in San Antonio. And it's a beautiful town. It's just like one of these towns where it's like real, just like old school American white picket fence. People leave their doors unlocked. You know, there's like 2 gas stations. I mean, it's a bigger town than that. There's more than 2 gas stations, but it's a small Texas town. And it's also like the start of hill country. Like once you start driving into Kerrville, it goes from like relatively flat land to just semi-mountainous. That's why they call it hill country, and it's really beautiful. But there's definitely no woke DEI shit going on in Kerrville. That's for sure. Town where you could sing "I'm proud to be American." Yeah, vote for sure. For sure. Yeah, what's up, Sheng? How you doing? Does he think DEI is simply a state by state thing? Yeah, like it's federally enforced. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, like I said, the big cities in Texas, you got a lot of woke DEI shit going on. Here in San Antonio, definitely in Austin, definitely in Austin, Dallas, Houston, El Paso. That's like the big 5 basically. Yeah, it's but not in Kerrville. Kerrville's just a nice little town, you know. Definitely sing "Proud to be an American" there. Yeah. The hills have eyes. What's up, Camel Tony? How you doing? So yeah. Anyways, let's go, Hassan. Tell us the news, bud.
A clear argument as to, like, he was trying to at least like create some talking points that made sense to those in the margins. But nowadays, with increased political polarization and a lack of interest, a severe lack of interest in identifying issues and solving them, all you need to do is hit a button. It's like DEI. You could substitute reaching. No, I don't think that's a reach. I don't think that's a reach at all. Especially because like this is something that a professional political commentator would avoid. When I say something is a problem born out of capitalism, for example, or even if Charlie were to say like something is an issue with like socialization or something, like diverting funds away to like woke transgender surgeries, instead of like, I'm doing a better job of making a convincing right-wing argument here. If I was a Republican commentator, I'd be like, well, Texas actually had to reorient its expenditure priorities as a direct consequence of the federal government under the Biden administration to make sure that transgenders were getting bottom surgeries in immigrant detention centers at the federal facilities. Like, at least I'm lying, but I'm lying in a direction that kind of makes sense. On the other hand, Charlie just goes, nah, Texas is a DEI state, man. Like, what do you mean Texas is a DEI state? I thought people voted for honest to God meritocracy in Texas. Do you see what I mean? Do you see what I'm saying? Like, there's a difference between like trying to tie together lies that make at least some kind of sense versus just saying a talking point. At least like talking points that Republicans used to use back in the day were like.
Yeah, he's talking about the floods. He's commenting on Charlie Kirk saying it's because of DEI. that 100 people died in the floods because DEI or whatever.
Somewhat associated with the issue at hand. Now, they're not even associated with the issue at hand. What the hell? And then when we're working through the details of like where the spending priorities were, motherfuckers come in here and go, that's for MSNBC. It's fake news. Okay, man. I'll bet you love MSNBC, you goddamn libtard. Like, no, I don't. As a matter of fact, I'm not exactly fond of MSDNC either. I'm not a Democrat. I'm not playing team sports. I don't care. I care about issues, and I care about solving problems rather than assuming that one team is going to solve a made-up problem that I now believe is a real problem. And here we have another absolute moron, Kirsty Noem.
Government don't manage these disasters. The state does. We come in and support them. And that's exactly what we did here in this situation. FEMA went to an enhanced level immediately. But as soon as you signed the major disaster declaration, we were able to get them resources and dollars right away, just like you envisioned through state block grants.
In 2005, people were warned Hurricane Rita caused massive evacuations out of Houston and surrounding areas. Traffic congestion caused massive delays in evacuations. 107 fatalities were directly linked to the evacuation alone. After that, the city-state finally put in contraflow lanes to easily let traffic use both sides of a highway to evacuate. Disaster has to happen first for steps to be taken to fix it. And in 2005, people were warned, and just like today, they pretended it didn't matter. They had decades to be prepared for that as well. It's not like we are oblivious. It's not like we don't have scientists that are actively ringing the alarm bells with regular frequency. We do. We have these things. We've had these things for decades. People have been screaming about this exact moment for like 30 years. And every step of the way, we've gone, lol, that's just weather, stupid. That's just weather. You're so stupid. It's just weather. I was having this discussion about Don't Look Up with some friends of mine that were obviously annoyed with the smug tone that it took. Shouts out to Adam McKay. Love him. Friend of the show. Hassan Abihead, Adam McKay. I didn't take issue with Don't Look Up. The reason why I didn't take issue with the bluntness of it, because it had no subtlety whatsoever, or even the smugness of it all, was because I think we're getting stupider and stupider. We're getting dumber and dumber every day. So I think that will stand alone as a brilliant work one day when people go back and rewatch it and go, well, this is exactly what is taking place.
And we're still there in presence, and FEMA's been deployed, and we're cutting through the paperwork of the old FEMA, streamlining it much like your vision of how FEMA should operate, and it's been a much better response to help these families get through this terrible situation. We still are looking for people.
We saw a version of this in COVID as well, where like dudes were literally in their last breath decrying that COVID was fake. It's like, brother, you are dying. You're dead. You're dead. In a couple hours, you will die. And you are choosing to spend your last hours on Earth with a ventilator shoved down your throat, talking about some culture war. What the You're dead. You're dying. Maybe I'm woke, so forgive me for being woke and lame and a libtard. But I don't care how much it costs to save people's lives. I don't care. I don't care what it takes. I would much rather spend the money on proper prevention. I would much rather spend the money on harm mitigation. That is what the government is supposed to do. What the is crazy out here is actually because you rich boy. What the do you mean? We're talking about the government. What do you mean? Because you rich boy. Okay, I pay more to the government than you do. And I'm saying use the funds adequately.
U.S. Attorney General Pam Bondi getting harshly criticized in what is known as the MAGA world after the Justice Department released a memo saying that the accused...
Let's see. I don't know if this is actually a video from his channel. It might have been somebody else's. Nope, this is his. Yeah, this is his. There's a couple different channels out there. There's one called Hassan Reacts. There's another one called Hassanabi Productions. I think there's a few. There's a few Hassan channels out there that are like, you know, pretty relevant. But this looks to be his official channel, so yeah. Interesting jump cuts we got.
A sex trafficker died by suicide in jail while awaiting trial, and that there is no so-called client list of notable figures.
What is this? California officials are failing to protect girls on the playing field and in the locker room. The Department of Justice has filed suit. Going into the replies and seeing the big bad tranny rhetoric is not working on the right wingers is honestly amazing. Oh my God, they try to do it. They try to do the trans thing. This is either an insane lack of self-awareness on display here, or they enjoy gaslighting us. Officials are failing to protect girls. Yeah. Oh, they're talking about Jeffrey Epstein. Nice try. Why haven't you released the files? Someone said you were Florida's Attorney General from 2011 2019, ? And that's when the Epstein flight logs were public. Victims were coming forward with lawsuits. Evidence was in abundance. And you did nothing. You didn't do one thing. No probes, no investigation from you. Florida, wow. But here's your chance to do the right thing, but you won't because you need to protect Trump. You aren't about protecting females at all. Stupid bitch. How about you protect them from the Epstein client list? Oh my God. They are trying it. They're trying to do the, hey guys, I know the Epstein client list is a big deal for a lot of y'all, but have you considered trans people?
Several weeks, the Department of Education has notified the Department of Education in California, as well as the California Interscholastic Federation, that they were in violation of Title IX. They were allowing men to compete in women's sports. Now, this is after years of their being in violation of Title IX. We informed them that if they did not change, that we were going to refer these cases to the Department of Justice, and we have done exactly that.
Thank you, Secretary McMahon, for all of your hard work. And today, the Department of Justice has filed a lawsuit against California Department of Education and the governing body for women's sports in California. We've made it very clear, only women in women's sports under Title IX. An example in California,
did you guys ban him? You don't need to ban this guy, it's fine.
He would have lost every race.
He said God is not real.
In women's sports, he won over 36 medals. Those medals should be returned.
Oh my God, this is again, Finally, the trans deflection method is failing. Bringing this back to my, personal experience, it's like watching the Hassan parachute cord being ripped so hard that it doesn't work anymore. This is precisely what's going on here. They're doing the trans people parachute cord, and people are not even remotely interested. Gunther Eagleman, shut up and resign. Sick and tired of you blatantly lying to the American people. They finally found something they're angry about than trans people being happy. I love that. I told you, we finally found something. And I said this would be it. I said this would be more impactful than even like not ending the wars. Like there are some who maybe fantasize about Trump being like more aggressive against Israel. You know what I mean? In the base, there were some who may have voted for him that are not immediately in the base, but voted for him nonetheless because they truly thought that he would be a peaceful dove. You can still continue duping those people, but this is a real schism. It's the dumbest thing to potentially have a schism over, but it's one that is obviously impactful for these people. So instead of getting them to go, instead of, you know, making fun of them and being like, oh, you guys thought he was going to release this stuff, even though we all knew he wasn't going to release this stuff, we should welcome these people and help them radicalize in the direction of the truth. Because there are a lot of people who feel upset. W Trump. W Israel. W Trump. Hell yeah, brother, you're right. Weird time to say W Trump and W Israel while we're talking about the Trump administration refusing to release the Epstein client list. But considering we know that at least Ehud Barak was on, was directly involved, former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak was involved with the Epstein. He was an Epstein affiliate. This chat is like W file rape, bro. W. Thanks, chatter. Trisha Hope, national delegate for Texas, who is a January 6th activist, says, I have been to 42 Trump rallies. Oh my God, that's crazy. That's a crazy number. After the first impeachment, I drove to D.C. and spent 2 weeks walking the halls of Congress to encourage Republicans to support President Trump. I sat in the hearings and I supported President Trump. I was there the night he was acquitted. After the 2020 election was stolen, I went to see 2,000 mules. I was livid at the lack of action. Oh, God. That's embarrassing. That's so embarrassing to admit that you got duped by a Dinesh D'Souza production. God damn, dude. Have some self-respect. At least lie and be like, I wouldn't mention that if I were you, you know? I was livid at the lack of action. I contacted Dinesh D'Souza and told them I wanted to deliver copies to Republican members of Congress. They donated 200 copes. I went with a team of 4 to D.C. and personally hand-delivered each one. When it became clear that J6 was a setup, I started helping J6ers. I met with members of Congress on their behalf. I was able to get a donation of 435 American Gulag Chronicle books to deliver to Congress. She's like a trot in her effective praxis is just doing pamphlets. This is basically the American Trotsky. I would like to write many pamphlets. I wrote many pamphlets about the American Gulag. Myself and a team organized by Trumpertarian delivered 535 copies to every single member of the House and Senate. I worked for the last 3.5 years to help free the J6ers. I organized Trump events, became a state delegate, and then a national delegate. I recently made a donation to the Smithsonian in honor of the J6ers. I say all of this to tell you I am done. President Trump's lack of concern for the Epstein victims and his...
Imagine how much he would soy out if there was some, you know, right-wing streamer doing a mocking Arab voice or something. You know, imagine how fucking soyed out he'd get over that.
Callous response.
This is the same guy that is he the one that initiated the cracker discourse, or was it Frogan? Who started that whole thing?
To the reporter's question ends my relationship with him. I will not support a man who denies justice to the victims, who in this case are children, and mocks the question. Okay, I'm gonna be honest with you. Controversial opinion time. But maybe these people are so stupid that they literally do think trans people are doing
I do too, yeah.
Because I always used to think like, oh, they just cynically say that, like in an effort to just be transphobic. And it is transphobic to operate under the assumption that like queer people are doing pedophilia. But I guess these guys like they are honest about their interest in combating pedophilia. They say it so much, they start believing it. No, I think a lot of people I just assumed were just cynically saying that to smear trans people. Now I realize they're just incredibly stupid and incredibly hateful, and therefore they actually believe those lies. And that is part of the reason why they hate trans people. But yeah, Evan Lowsworth says they finally found something they're angry about than trans people being happy. Yeah, that makes me happy that there is like something that they genuinely care about. That is cool. Blackmail evidence. And
Southern Voice thing they do is very annoying. Gorp does this too. I call him out from time to time how he's privileged coastal or whatever. Yeah, he's an elite coastal individual. I guess technically I am too. And I grew up in Miami and I lived in New York. I'm not technically on the coast. I'm a couple hours from the coast now, but I never mocked anybody, you know. Evan Lowe's Wharf? No, I have not. I do not know who that is. New York, yeah. It doesn't get more coastal elite than fucking New York City, bro. All right, I'm gonna put this on. Like all the topics. I haven't seen this yet, but from what I can tell about the topics, like I said, there's like history, politics, Nazis, racism, black genocide. Like, you guys are gonna be jerking off to this video. You guys are gonna be jerking off. And it's made by somebody that everybody hates, which I love. I love that. It's amazing. But I haven't watched it yet, so we'll see. It is dun 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 dun. No, like that was the next Hassan video I had in my playlist. The ultimate bad guy of the internet, Bad Empanada. Argentine Trotsky, yeah, exactly. Everybody. I don't think I've met anybody. I got introduced to Bad Empanada by, I believe it was Anoke. I believe Anoke introduced me to Bad Empanada. So yeah, but I've never known anyone. The thing is, like, I've met a lot of people that would agree with him probably on a million things, but I've never met anybody that actually likes him. Corp watches on his stream, really? Yeah, I can imagine. Aside from the general leftoid nonsense, it's quite measured in these kinds of videos. I don't know. I've only seen a handful of his videos, so I'm not even sure. But this one's called Racism in Argentina, Myth versus Reality from Nazi Argentina to Black Genocide. So it's got a lot of stuff in here. I figured you guys would like, that sounds like a bunch of topics you guys would love to fucking argue about in the chat. So it is long though, so I don't know if we're gonna do the whole thing. Maybe we'll just watch, like, you know, half hour to an hour of it, and then chop it up and watch the rest of it tomorrow or something, because it's like 2 hours long. But like I said, I'm working, so I'm just gonna be listening. And if it's you know, if it's not vibing, if for some reason it's not vibing, then we can change it a little bit. We care a lot about Argentina, though. I mean, not particularly, but, you know, if he's going to sit here and debunk the whole Nazi Argentina thing, I'm curious about that. Don't you mock Caesar from Fallout? It shows that faction in time. No, wait, dude. I got the, oh, what's it called? Oh, I forgot the name of the coin. Oh, is it Denarius? I think it's Denarius. I got a Denarius fucking emote featuring fucking Joshua Graham, fucking Edward Swallow, and fucking whoever the other guy is. The three, it's like the triumvirate. I have that as an emote. I got the fucking, the red, the golden bull. I got all kinds of stuff going on. We are true to Kaiser, okay? We are true. Potential Bad and Banana Rex. Drop them in the Discord. Like I said, if this one's not vibing, we'll change it. I'm just curious about, you know, this. Apparently, he's gonna debunk Nazi Argentina and Black Genocide and all this stuff. So we'll see. I don't know. But like I said, I'm gonna be working here, so.
For some reason or another, racism in Argentina has become something of a hot button topic in English language social media spaces.
Oh yeah.
Oh over the last 5 to 10 years or so. If you were educated on the matter by the average TikTok video or Twitter post, you'd come out thinking that Argentina was a country where all black and brown people were systematically rounded up and executed, which then subsequently imported every single high-ranking member of the Nazi Third Reich. And now everyone in Argentina is a blonde-haired, blue-eyed descendant of a Nazi war criminal.
And I love this analogy because after World War II, the Nazis all moved to Argentina. Buenos Aires, right?
I don't know if it was Buenos Aires specifically, but yes, Argentina.
Yeah.
Now, I could speculate on what the motivations of people who spread these sorts of narratives are. I think in a way, for Americans especially, it's a sort of comforting deflection, which allows them to imagine that there is, at least somewhere, a country that is more racist and with a worse history of racism than theirs. But the main problem here is not really the motivations. It's the fact that this stuff is either just factually wrong or exaggerated to the point of parody. So I want to talk here about racism in Argentina in a way that you've probably never seen it talked about before, based on actual historical facts, comparing Argentina with the USA throughout to provide some actual perspective. We're going to be going over a lot of the history and discussing racism in Argentina today, which is really not at all as it's commonly imagined by the many foreigners who for some reason really like to talk about it. So yeah, let's get going. This video was made possible thanks to my supporters on Patreon and Ko-fi. If you like it and you'd like to see more like it, consider heading over there and supporting me yourself. There are two very common myths that are pervasively spread, with little to no evidence ever being provided for them in English language spaces. One of these is the myth that there was some sort of genocide of black people in Argentina, and the other one is this idea that Argentina was a sort of singular Nazi utopia, where like the Third Reich was resurrected in secret, and now everyone in Argentina has a Nazi grandpa. Let's begin with that first one. To begin, it is absolutely true that there is...
Yeah, I haven't either. I've heard of... The only thing that I've heard of that was really fucking shady was that whole, you know, flights over the ocean thing, where they would just load up planes with fucking dissidents and criminals or whatever, and just fly over the ocean and throw them all off the plane and then come back. Ever seen anything like... Ever heard about that? That's some crazy shit. But no, I've not heard this black genocide discourse. That's Chile? I thought it was Argentina. Wasn't it? Was it? Yeah. During Argentina's ruthless dictatorship in the mid-70s, the Skyvan PA-51 was used to throw victims alive. Oh my god. The fucking computer's going nuts.
There's a period...
Yeah. This is what I'm talking about. Yeah, I mean, maybe they did it in Chile too. I'm not sure, but... unquote, disappear thousands of innocent citizens seen as a threat to the state. I remember seeing this actual, the CBS piece they did on it. It's pretty interesting. But that's all I remember, you know. Maybe that and like the Falkland Wars or whatever, or the Falkland Wars.
During Argentina's history, where a significant portion of the population was black. As late as 1838, the most populous part of the country, Buenos Aires, had a black population of around 26%, though numerically it is important to add that the overall population of the city at the time was still only 63,000. So there was absolutely a time during the history of Argentina where around 1 in 4 or 1 in 5 people was black. Most of them at this time would have been freed slaves or the descendants of freed slaves. But the overall population of Argentina at the time was simply not very high, and immigration over the coming decades and century came almost exclusively from Europe as the slave trade was abolished during the beginning of the 19th century. There were never any segregation laws, so what actually happened is that this black population, which at one point was significant in proportion but not so much in raw number, simply intermixed with the masses of European migrants who arrived over the course of the nearly 2 centuries afterwards, until we get to the point of today, where after many generations of this, visible African features are simply not nearly as common as they once would have been. That is the actual answer for what happened to the black Argentines. In reality, there are still black Argentines today. They just are not proportionately as much of the population as they were, say, 150 years ago. The reason why, in comparison, the black population in the USA is so prominent today is, for one, because numerically there were way more of them. Because, you know, the USA literally forcibly bred them to be slaves. So in 1850, when Argentina's total population was just then approaching 1 million, with perhaps at most a couple 100,000 of that number being black, the black population of the USA alone was already 4 million, most of them still enslaved. And for two, it's because of racial segregation. Argentina never had segregation laws like the USA did, and the masses of migrants arriving from Europe in the second half of the 19th century were able to freely mingle with the black population as they pleased. Meanwhile, in the USA,
What's up, Glock?
until at least the 1960s and 70s, a black person who married a white person was still at serious risk of being murdered for it. This segregation resulted in a unique black identity and culture forming and enduring until the present day, as black people were literally forced into forming their own segregated communities out of necessity. To be clear, this is not a good thing. And I'm not saying that it's not a good thing because black American culture is bad or anything. Actually, the truth is the opposite. Without black American culture, the USA would probably be the most boring country in the whole world. Black Americans are by far the most disproportionately culturally influential group of people relative to population in the world. Rather, the bad part of it is that this only happened due to segregation being forced upon them by white people. And Americans looking at Argentina from the outside don't really seem to get that. They're thinking of, well, we have a strong, specifically...
Why are we watching this discussing Subhuman? Because everybody hates him. And he's talking about the myth versus reality from Nazi Argentina to black genocide. So, you know, it's got a lot of topics you guys usually jerk off to. Especially you, Glock. I think this sounds right up your alley. But everybody hates this guy. So, you know, that's usually what we watch. We watch people we hate because that, you know, lends to the friction. Yeah, I know, Glock. I know. I'm not a Nazi. I know you're not a Nazi, all right? I know you're not an actual Nazi. He's being very unfair to the American people. We need to extract bad input out from Argentina and throw... Yeah. I am a fascist. Yeah, no, that's... Yeah. Believe me, I'm not calling you a Nazi.
Black culture, and they don't. It must be because they killed them all or something. But the opposite is true. The whole reason why Argentina lacks such a visible, distinct, specifically black culture today is actually because its history of racism is less severe than that of the USA. Its lack of similarly brutal and repressive racist laws is precisely why the African population and the larger European population were able to mix together with relative freedom. So black culture in Argentina did not remain its own thing. Rather, after slavery was gradually abolished, slaves freed, and the population was no longer officially segregated by race, black Argentines became a part of a greater whole, albeit due to their relatively low numbers in gross numeric terms, in more subtle ways that aren't so often noticed today. For example, musical styles developed by Afro-descendants in Uruguay and Argentina became popular with the broader population and eventually contributed to the mishmash of different cultures that is Argentine tango. There was no one behind the scenes like, ha, yes, make them mingle together to breed out the black people. There was a place where that actually did happen, 100%. It's called Australia though, not Argentina. The alternate explanations that are offered by the English-speaking bloggers who've popularized this black genocide idea are a lot simpler though. If you search on Google for Black Argentina genocide, you get directed to entirely unsourced posts spreading grand narratives of a systemic campaign to basically hunt down and execute every single black person in Argentina. Nothing like that ever happened, nor does any evidence for it exist. I wish I could direct you to an academic
what's up, Onyo?
Source that debunks this idea, but this was basically just invented in random blog posts spread by uncritical social media users who just saw it pop up when they googled Black Genocide Argentina. And historians don't really seem to have much interest in refuting something which originates from zero historical evidence in the first place, something that was almost entirely made up. I say almost entirely there because it is at least possible that this has its roots in certain misconceptions that used to be somewhat commonly held by some Argentines. Particularly before the 80s and 90s, some tried to explain the relatively low black population in Argentina with two unfounded myths. One, that they were rounded up and sent to die in wars as cannon fodder in an intentional genocide, and two, that diseases were spread in their neighborhoods in a similar effort to genocide them. Basically, what happened is that people asked themselves the question of, what happened to all the black people? And rather than landing on the kind of obvious conclusion of mass migration plus no segregation, they made that stuff up to explain it. In the 1980s, the historian George Reed Andrews was the first researcher to finally seriously look into these two ideas, and he found that there was simply no evidence for either of them. And that, in fact, the evidence seems to contradict them. The Argentine military was very quickly integrated after independence, more than 100 years before the US military was desegregated, mind you. So white and black soldiers mostly fought in the same units, a practice which would have been quite counterproductive to using black soldiers as cannon fodder. And if anything, white soldiers in the military tended to have higher death rates than black ones. And the evidence indicates that black people actually died less in epidemics than their proportionate share of the population. So there is simply no evidence that anything resembling these myths ever happened. And there is especially no evidence that such things were intentionally inflicted upon black Argentines. So what likely happened here which resulted in this spreading far and wide is that some American blogger picked up on these already incorrect explanations for why black people supposedly disappeared in Argentina, and then exaggerated them further to an absurd degree by claiming that black people were also systematically hunted down on top of everything else. They then posted the stuff that they made up to their blog, which ended up being indexed by Google and then spread far and wide from there. The reality is just a lot simpler. The slave trade was abolished, so very few new Africans were arriving to Argentina, while many new Europeans were arriving. And this combined with the lack of racial segregation laws to ensure that the relatively low number of black Argentines would gradually mix with Europeans and others over the centuries, to the point that now relatively few people remain who have physical features that are commonly considered to be African. So the truth is quite a bit less dramatic and less useful as outrage fuel compared to the Argentine black genocide myth. The second common myth, which isn't so much of a myth as it is a huge exaggeration, is that of Argentina being like this really special destination for Nazis post-World War II, where they sort of went to revive the Fourth Reich or whatever. And this idea, I think, is best described as a simple deflection, mostly coming from people
Anti-America hatred goes mainstream. I'll become. I saw something that I knew you would like today. Where is it? At least I think you would like it. It's where was it? Where's this guy at? Oh, this guy, I think.
In the CIA, we didn't give a hoot about democracy. I mean, it was fine if a government was elected and would cooperate with us, but if it didn't, then democracy didn't mean a thing to us. And I don't think it means a thing today. The true goal of the United States government is control. And they feel that if the United States did not control the governments of Latin America, then somebody else would. And the principle of government by the people, for the people, of the people, that is that's just silly. In the CIA, we didn't give a hoot about...
Interesting. Okay, and based. What do we got here? I think that was it for now. Oh, this one goes hard.
Heard you want your country back. Shut the f*** up. Heard you want your country back. You can't have that.
Dude, fucking right-wing memes fucking slap, dude. They fucking slap, man.
Your country back. Shut the f*** up. Heard you want your country back. You can't have that.
Like, it's just the left doesn't have anything like that, man. It's like branding. Like, they don't have any branding. And this guy too, that Bob Villain guy or whatever, he did a show and people were saying death to the IDF, and he was like, whoa, hold on, guys, we don't want to do that. All right.
I'm trying to keep my talking to a minimum today. Because that's what got us in trouble in the first place. But, you know, we saw an icon give support. No, you're going to get me in trouble. You're going to get me in trouble. Apparently, every other chant is fine, and you lot will get me in trouble. Free, free! Free, free! Free, free! Free, free! Yeah, man. We're going to stick with the classics, alright?
We're gonna stick with the classics. That lasted all of one day. Fashwave. If that's a link, you gotta put it in the Discord. What was this?
Europe is losing its people, and this is concerning considering that the world witnessed a population increase of a staggering 70.2 million people in 2024. Asia gained 28.6 million, Oceania 600,000, while Africa had the biggest increase in population, 35 million people. South America's population grew by 2.6 million, and North and Central America by 4.6 million. But Europe was the only continent that lost people, despite significant immigration from North Africa, the Middle East, and South Asia. The total decrease in 2024 was 1.2 million. But why? First, the average birth rate in Europe is around 1.5 children per woman, which is below the replacement level of 2.1, needed to maintain a stable population. Secondly, many countries in Eastern Europe experience high emigration rates, with skilled people moving to the United States and Canada. And then, because of the war in Ukraine, death rates have increased in both Ukraine and Russia. With many men at war, birth rates have collapsed in both countries. And that's why Europe is losing its people, and this is concerning.
You guys need to get on track, bro. similarities between Mao's communist revolution in China and the left in America today. Forced compliance and shaming. Bro, even Japan's not having it, bro.
And people wonder why the Japanese are worried about opening up to mass immigration. Visiting Tokyo is almost like time travel into the past. Meanwhile, in Paris... You'd think Japan would be running a mile from mass migration. Thanks to their chronically low fertility rate, they're embracing it. Japan is finally opening up its borders, and the warning signs are already emerging. Kurdish migrants arriving from Turkey haven't exactly integrated with Japan's venerated tranquility, prompting protests by the Japanese First Movement demanding they be deported. And as of yesterday, they are being deported. 78% of the Japanese public want stricter controls on immigration, while former Prime Minister and opposition leader Yoshihiko Noda says Japan must adopt multiculturalism or the country will no longer survive. But if Japan sacrifices and loses its much-admired high-trust society in the process, what will be left that's even worth saving? And people wonder why the Japanese are worried.
Yep, they got to get it together too. People want to talk about is that it's the IMF, the World Bank, forcing them to open their borders. So basically Americans, again, just like in Europe. Okay. What else we got here?
As a German, I'm furious about the deportations of Mexicans in LA. You cannot get rid of Mexicans. They're the hard-working Americans. They're real Americans. They have family values. They work hard. And they would also never let their daughter date a black guy. Yeah? They're more American than most Americans. If you want to make America great again, don't deport Latinos, deport the French. Yeah? Get them out. It'd be less cunty country. French people, good food. Mexican food, way better. But they're not cunty about it. If you get rid of Mexicans, you lose tacos. You can't live without tacos. Chinese food, because that's also made by Mexicans. Listen, nothing against French people. This is a very woke statement. I'm supporting the Latinos. I'm standing with the Latinos. Okay? Shabbat shalom. As a German, I'm furious about...
That guy's awesome. I was gonna put this in Skade's Discord to see what people say.
Bro, I'm about to crash out. You don't understand. Like, every day I go on X and there's just these videos promoting Chinese infrastructure, saying that, oh, China's in the future. Like, they're 1,000 years ahead, 3,000 years ahead. Like, I'm freaking out, bro. Like, that's just not true. Like, they're showing some dumb neon lights pretending that is infrastructure. That's not infrastructure, man. If neon light is infrastructure, is this Christmas light decorated house also infrastructure? Like, who is it for? Is it Santa Claus and his reindeers? This is the reality of Chinese infrastructure. It's tofu drag projects everywhere. It's that when it rains, your roof collapses. It's that things aren't even bolted to the floor. Bro, I'm about to crash out. You don't understand.
What happened to Skatefront streaming on Twitch? I don't know. I talk to him once in a while. We'll like DM a little bit back and forth once in a while. And he sent me an invite to his Discord, I don't know, maybe a couple weeks ago, maybe a month ago. And I've just dropped like a few memes in there, but that's about it. I'm not too big on Discord, but yeah, I talk to him, like I have a small like back and forth DM session from time to time. I know a lot of people don't like Skade, but Skade is somebody who I appreciate talking to. I don't need to agree with everybody on everything. So, right, just from that alone, like I try to like build a foundation where I can try to talk to anybody. And I will say this, there's never been a time where I did not have an interesting conversation with Skade, that's for sure. Every single time that I've talked to Skade, it's been fucking interesting, so Sargon video. All right, let's just vibe with the Argentina thing for a little bit. If it's not vibing anymore, then we'll move on. We'll get some Sargon going. I can't walk away my dogs without a leash, but you let Germans out. You're the problem. Yeah. I know. Me, the whole me and the dog, the leash dog problem is definitely a conundrum. But yeah, I don't know why. I haven't seen Skate streaming, so I don't know if he's just taking a break or what the deal is. His streams are good. Sucks he stopped. I always picked him as a Russian asset. I think if anything, he's a Chinese asset. I'm pretty sure he's like a self-described Maoist, isn't he? I'm pretty sure he's a Maoist. But yeah, I look, Skade is not liked by a lot of people, all right? But I have always enjoyed talking to Skade. It's always been an interesting conversation. And that's all I could ask for, really. It's just interesting conversations. The thing is, it's like, I've also had interesting conversations with people I disagree with, but they ended up being fucking total fucking dick losers, like fucking PPG, right? So it's like, there's streamers out there that everybody hates, right? I get it, but like Skade has always been nice to me. He's never been a dick. Well, actually, like when I first met Skade, he was a total dick to me, and I might have been a little bit of a dick to him too. So like right off the bat, I did not like Skade. But after talking to Skade for a while, like I realized like maybe I need to just grow thicker skin, and or just not take things personally, We're all just anonymous people on the internet, so it kind of like that always like bumps things up a couple notches. But I'm pretty sure he was a Maoist though. I want to say he's a self-described Maoist. I'd like to try to find out why he stopped. Are you in his Discord? He has a Discord. The link for it's probably like on his channel or something. You missed one comment. Not gonna lie. Your idea about how unique America is in the world history is for integrating the whole world and especially black people is kind of being debunked by Bada Banana with his examples about South American countries. What's unique about America is actually how racist it was. I mean, I don't think I'm wrong though. I don't think I'm wrong. He could just be saying something, but it doesn't mean that he's right. Name one country in this entire planet that can do what we do. That can actually take a bunch of races, put them in a pot, stir it up, and not have it turn into a fucking, full-blown fucking shit show. We actually, as ugly as it is and as chaotic as it can be sometimes, it still works for us, Argentina and Brazil. Well, I don't think they do it as good as we do it, man. I don't think they do it as good as we do it. It is more diverse America or Brazil. Damn it. There it is. While both the United States and Brazil are considered diverse countries, Brazil is generally regarded as having a higher degree of genetic and ethnic diversity due to its history of intermixing between European, African, and indigenous populations. The United States, while having a significant immigrant population, tends to have more distinct ethnic enclaves rather than the same level of genetic mixing seen in Brazil. Okay, name me one country that does it as well as we do without all the genetic intermixing. How about that? Okay. We're leading in that category, all right? We're leading in the anti-race mixing category. We have yet to see on that one. True, Shang, true. You never know. You never know. Only thing you do better is guns. That's true. That's true. aside from having somewhat of a sizable black minority, America really hasn't been particularly racially diverse until relatively recently. I think, yeah, probably. I mean, the thing is that, you know, racial diversity is so concentrated into bigger cities. I mean, you go to flyover country and there's no diversity, you know, but once you get to the coast, it's like fucking, you know, booms. Unless you're in Springfield, Ohio, where they're eating the dogs, they're eating the cats, they're eating the pets. You know, that's diversity. You're not good at race mixing? I know, that's what Google's saying. That's what Google's saying here. It says, the United States, while having a significant immigrant population, tends to have more distinct ethnic enclaves rather than the same level of genetic mixing seen in Brazil. So, we've definitely done some race mixing, yeah, for sure. Jack Marin is like 25% European. There you go. Yeah, if you go way back, for sure. Yeah, for some bad stuff that happened during slavery. Yeah, definitely. There's gonna be a lot of that sprinkled in. Anyways, whatever. I knew this topic was gonna be fucking right up everybody's alley. We're talking about race mixing, black genocide, Nazis, history. This has got to be like, you know, they're doing anti-racism without mixing in Russia. Yeah, that's true. That's true. I'll got my door and meet all sorts of different people and we get along. Nice. Nice, nice, nice. All right, let's go.
From the USA, who focus so disproportionately on Argentina in this way, rather than their own country, in order to deflect from and ignore their own country's significantly worse history with Nazi immigrants and much broader collaboration with them worldwide in the post-World War II era. The root of this myth can actually be found in a very intentional propaganda campaign by the USA in the 1940s, which started before World War II was even over. The US ambassador to Argentina literally wrote a book in which he alleged that Juan Domingo Perón, who was an electoral candidate in Argentina at the time, was at the head of a Nazi plot to revive the Third Reich in Argentina, and that if he ended up winning the election, then basically like Adolf Hitler and all the Nazi higher-ups would go to Argentina and secretly form the Fourth Reich there. And ironically, this actually backfired incredibly, because the fact that the Americans were attacking Perón only made him more popular, as the voter base was very averse to foreign interference in their country. Perón even started saying that the election was not a choice between him and his opponent, but rather a choice between him and the American ambassador. Basically, this was a colossal backfire for American foreign policy at the time. Now, if you might expect, if you know anything at all about the USA's history of foreign interference, this was a narrative concocted for the sake of attempting to delegitimize an electoral candidate whose policies they simply were against. Perón was an economic nationalist who promised to improve workers' rights and curtail foreign control in the Argentine economy, and those things simply didn't mesh very well with the USA's interest in the country. Thus, this smear campaign was born. And while it did backfire spectacularly at the time, it nonetheless remained in the public consciousness in the USA as an enduring myth ever since. In actual reality, there was one place that was the prime Nazi haven post-World War II, and it wasn't Argentina. It wasn't even the USA. It was Germany itself. The idea that there was some sort of mass and incredibly successful denazification in post-World War II Germany is really a total myth. Denazification was carried out very half-heartedly, and only the very worst Nazi criminals were ever really punished. Countless prominent Nazis still managed to find their way into influential positions in the post-war German government and public service, and even into important international institutions and alliances, like the European/American Military Alliance, NATO. No other country can even come close to the amount of Nazis who were basically rehabilitated with their crimes totally unaddressed, their ideologies unchanged and unexamined, than post-World War II West Germany, and to a lesser extent, East Germany. And it is absolutely criminal that in these discussions, Germany has gotten off so lightly given this. Like when we talk about where the Nazis went after World War II, Germany barely even factors in, right? People talk about like Argentina first and foremost, and maybe the USA, and maybe the USSR, and that's kind of it. It's to the point that I've even seen some Germans themselves pointing to Argentina as like the special Nazi haven, as if their own great-grandfather or grandfather wasn't a Nazi himself, and as if their own country isn't literally the Nazi country. It's very audacious. The second biggest haven for post-World War II Nazis was ironically the country from which this myth originates, the USA. Primarily through Operation Paperclip, but also through other means, the USA recruited prominent Nazis who they believed had expertise that they could make use of. This ranged from rather inoffensive scientists who weren't very political, to outright Nazi ideologues and war criminals, who they recruited quite specifically for their expertise at doing such crimes. A particularly egregious example of this was the USA recruiting the Nazi mass murderer Klaus Barbie, a former SS officer, after the war. Barbie was responsible for personally torturing and executing Jewish and resistance prisoners in France during World War II. He also ordered the deportation of more than 10,000 Jews and resistance fighters to death camps. The USA employed him, helped him to escape from Europe to Bolivia, and then at their direction, he aided the US-backed and installed military dictatorships prevalent throughout the region at the time. Comically, as if to prove my point here about Germany and the USA being the worst offenders together, once his decades-long stint as an American intelligence asset was over, he was recruited by West Germany. So much for denazification. The USA was a pretty obvious and natural destination for Nazis, given the fact that at the end of World War II, the country was still very much dominated by racial hatred, and it was still literally written into law, which would still go totally unaddressed for decades afterwards. World War II had also turned the USA into the world's most dominant global empire, thus making it capable of offering all of the greatest Nazis the most incentive to move there. So to imagine that a comparatively way less powerful country like Argentina, without any sort of clear racial ideology like that the USA had at the time, would have been a more attractive location for skilled Nazi refugees looking to help out another country's government in exchange for it looking the other way regarding their crimes, is wishful thinking at best. And I think the implausibility and the leaps of logic that are required to arrive at this conclusion that Argentina was like the greatest Nazi haven and not the USA, no, really demonstrates just why this idea of the Nazi Argentina endures so much in the imaginations of Americans in particular. As I've been saying throughout, because it allows them to deflect from the reality, where their own country was not only the biggest haven for Nazis post-World War II, aside from Germany itself, but also was the most in line with the Nazis ideologically. And notably, the USA today is still one of the global centers of actually existing Nazism. Influential racist politics are far more prevalent there than in Argentina. Nazis march openly in the streets, and there is a neo-Nazi mass shooting or terrorist attack or what have you practically every month there, and I might actually be giving them too much grace with that estimation. This isn't so much the case in Argentina, even though many Americans seem intent on framing it as such. It almost seems like a form of escapism from the reality, which is that their own country is what they imagine Argentina to be. The third biggest destination for post-World War II Nazis was the USSR. Like the USA and many other countries, the USSR was willing to overlook Nazi affiliations and potential crimes committed by Nazis, especially scientists, if they believed that they could be put to work for them. While the USSR recruited lower numbers of Nazis than the USA, it was still nonetheless a significant number. But the situation was still somewhat different, as the Nazis working for the USSR were under much stricter controls than elsewhere, where they were basically allowed to roam free and just live however they wanted. And very few of them were actually allowed to settle in the USSR, as once their work was done, most were simply deported to East Germany. Then, maybe in a very distant fourth, you could say that Argentina was the next most prominent destination for Nazi refugees. Also, quite differently to the USSR, the USA, and Germany, the most prominent Nazis who entered Argentina did not enter under invitation of the government. Argentina at the time had practically no immigration controls, and Nazi fugitives took advantage of that, most prominent among them being Adolf Eichmann. Interestingly enough, the government of West Germany found out that Eichmann was in Argentina already in 1952, but they did not report this to the Argentine government, because they were worried that if he was captured, he would retaliate by incriminating other Nazis, many of whom, by then, already held high positions in the West German governmental apparatus and public service at the time, so they decided to keep what they knew on the down low. Nonetheless, there was definitely some moderately significant Nazis whose entry into Argentina was actually facilitated by the government, though not nearly as many as in the USA and the USSR. The government of the time, under Juan Domingo Perón, had the lofty idea of turning Argentina into some sort of global industrial power, and they were willing to pursue basically any end to get there. And that led them into doing what the actual global powers of the time were also doing, recruiting Nazis who they thought could help out with their goals, to relatively little success comparatively though. Argentina largely failed in deriving any real long-lasting benefits from the former Nazis they recruited, as they basically only could get the scraps. Why would you go to Argentina when you could go to like the USA or the UK? Countries that could pay you a lot more and that had way more developed scientific and engineering fields. So while the USA, for example, was able to recruit Nazi scientists who were so significant that they became a crucial part of NASA, Argentina got the second or third-rate Nazis that no one else wanted. The most prominent Nazi who ended up in the employ of the Argentine government was probably the aerospace engineer Kurt Tank, who was the lead designer on many Nazi aircraft. But Tank only went to Argentina as a last resort after he was first rejected by the USSR, UK, and even China. Another prominent Nazi who went to Argentina was Ronald Richter, a nuclear physicist who, get this, ended up being a total fraud who scammed the Argentine government for millions of dollars by selling them the idea that he could create a fusion power device that would harness unlimited energy. So, not exactly the best and the brightest. Most of the greatest minds of the Nazis either stayed in Germany, went to some other European country, or went to the USA. This recruitment of Nazis by the Argentine government was not, as is often claimed, motivated by some sort of ideological adherence to Nazi doctrine. The American race ideology at the time was, as I said, way more in line with Nazi ideology than anything in Argentina, so that doesn't really make any sense. Juan Domingo Perón, at the same time as he was recruiting these Nazis, was also making inroads into integrating the country's prominent Jewish community into the government and public service for the very first time. He also issued a blanket immigration amnesty to all Jews who had entered the country illegally while fleeing World War II. That's clearly not something that he would have done if he was actually an adherent of Nazi race ideology, rather than just an opportunist who tried, and largely failed, to get some sort of scientific leg up for his country by recruiting Nazis who were viewed as having potentially useful expertise. Historian Renan Rhine notes that overall, only about 20,000 German and Austrian immigrants settled in Argentina post-World War II, and of them, only around 50 potential war criminals have ever been identified. This is far eclipsed by the number of Germans who migrated to the USA post-World War II, which was more than 500,000, with some estimates putting the number of Nazi war criminals in the US at upwards of 10,000. Renan considers the focus on Argentina in this matter to be both the result of the United States demonization campaign against Perón and also a convenient distraction from the worst offenders in the Nazi rat lines, which were the European countries themselves and Germany especially. He also states that more Nazis entered the USA and the Soviet Union, so the obsession with Argentina serves to ensure that the debate about post-war Nazi criminals migrating around the world can be ignored in the many other countries who receive them, some of whom in much greater numbers and to much greater benefit. In short, the idea of Argentina as some sort of exemplary Nazi haven post-World War II is a massive exaggeration from the actual reality, an exaggeration that has its roots in a 1940s US government propaganda campaign. Juan Domingo Perón represented a great break from the previous subservient governments that came before him, who were very, very amenable to foreign economic interests, which the Americans simply could not abide by. Since then, the USA has had a lot of difficulty with integrating Argentina into its sphere of influence, though it has very much tried to do so, most notably through its support of the 1976 to 1983 Argentine military dictatorship, which murdered around 30,000 people in what has been ruled as a genocide by Argentine courts. So it has thus remained quite convenient for the US and partisans of American empire to spread this myth and allow it to fester and grow. Since the Nazis are considered the ultimate evil in Western societies, framing Argentina as this sort of special and unique Nazi haven helps to delegitimize a country that the USA has had a lot of difficulty bringing under its control. And that's on top of everything else that I've said here about how it also distracts from the USA's much more pervasive and direct direct harboring of Nazi fugitives post-war, as well as to distract from its own racial ideology and its own much darker history of racism, which is not only far more similar to Nazism than anything that has ever come out of Argentina, but which quite directly ended up inspiring Nazism. This American spread idea of the Nazi Argentina is especially kind of weird, given that the Argentine government that was by far the closest ideologically to the Nazis, which carried out atrocities that in some cases were similar to those carried out by the Nazis, which was quite openly and proudly anti-Semitic on top of all of that, was the aforementioned US-backed dictatorship. It was only ever through American patronage and support that such a government could ever have been installed in Argentina and could ever have carried out the crimes that it did. And that honestly makes it kind of disgusting, the way that Americans focus so much on this Nazi Argentina myth when there's that just sitting there, this elephant in the room, that the USA actually supported mass killings in Argentina, real mass killings that actually verifiably did happen, of thousands of Jews no less. Not to mention as well that the #1 Nazi sanctuary post-war, West Germany, only existed as it did because the USA, which was pervasively involved in West German politics, both allowed and facilitated that happening. So the actual history is a lot more complicated than it is generally framed. The truth is that there isn't even a particularly significant proportion of Argentines with German ancestry. It's estimated that they are between 4 to 7% of the population, and most people who do have German ancestry in Argentina got it from earlier migrants from the late 19th century, not post-World War II ones, who comparatively only settled in very small numbers. And that compares to 13% of the population in the US who have German ancestry. So if you're gonna accuse anyone of having a secret Nazi grandpa, you've got a significantly higher chance of being closer to the mark if you ask an American that question rather than an Argentine. Today, there is little to no real Nazi influence in Argentina, and especially not in comparison to its enduring, present-day political relevance in Europe, the USA, Australia, and Canada, where crypto-Nazis are increasingly outright winning elections. And what little influence there is in Argentina of such racist right-wing ideologies does not come from the limited numbers of post-World War II German immigrants and their descendants. It's actually mostly imported via the internet by neo-Nazis and their adjacent far-right racists from Europe and the USA, who come into contact with Argentines via social media and other such means. We'll be getting more into this later. As if on cue, while I was making this video, a news story started doing the rounds. The headline reads, "Crates full of Nazi documents found in Argentine court's basement." This was immediately picked up on by ignorant English speakers, most of whom are American, of course. It affirmed their pre-existing, never investigated, picked up from media osmosis idea that Argentina was the Nazi haven, so yeah, that's all they needed. But if you actually read the article, you'll find that the real story paints precisely the opposite picture. These documents were propaganda material that the German embassy tried to smuggle into Argentina in 1941. The government at the time intercepted the shipment and seized the documents, specifically because they did not want the Nazis to spread such propaganda in Argentina. Pending judicial review, they were stored in the basement of the Supreme Court. However, the Nazis were defeated in 1945, so the case was dropped, and the documents were left there forgotten. But it's a lot easier to just read a funny headline that affirms the ignorant and damaging lies that you already believe, to accuse a country you know absolutely nothing about, which, ironically, has been a long-standing victim of imperialism and genocide at the hands of your country, of being what your country itself actually is. These people are simply proudly ignorant, proudly incurious, and their ignorance and lack of curiosity is easily weaponized in order to deflect from the endless globe-spanning crimes of their own nations, and their own infinitely worse involvement in aiding and abetting Nazis and spreading fascism globally post-war. All it takes is one clickbait headline, reaffirming the ignorant garbage that they already believed, and they're off. Now I'm going to move on to Argentina's history with race, which is very interesting in its own right, even aside from this whole comparative discussion. While things certainly were not good by any means in Argentina, and leaders fluctuated from being very racially accepting to being very racist, it's still not nearly as bad as the history of the United States, nor, for that matter, to the racial history of pretty much every single English-derived settler colony, like Canada and Australia. So let's move on to that now, and this is probably going to be the most interesting part of this video, because there's going to be a lot of historical tidbits in here that most of you have never heard of at all. This part of the video is going to be presented as a slideshow sort of presentation with voiceover but no video of me speaking. The history of racism in Argentina is a lot more dynamic than that of the British-derived settler colonies like Australia and the USA, where racial supremacy was outright written into law and there was a wide social consensus, including among the average person, that enforcing white supremacy was good and just. This is largely a side effect of the differences between the British and Spanish approaches to settler colonialism. British colonialism fostered settler colonies that Brits or other Europeans could migrate to. They then profited off this by taxing these colonists and monopolizing trade with them. The colonies were sold to settlers as new, untamed frontiers, where, unlike Europe, there was plenty of uninhabited land ready to be claimed by anyone. Obviously, this was not actually the case, as people already lived there, yet the settlers expected land all the same.
What's up,
so
Salty?
these indigenous people, due to their competing claims to the land that the settlers coveted for themselves, were considered a barrier to the settlers' desire for land. And shock, horror, the indigenous people didn't simply go quietly when these Europeans tried to take it from them. They rather fought back and defended it. So settler society, which grew rapidly over time with masses of newly arrived Europeans, responded to this by developing racist, exclusionary ideologies, which explained the retaliation of their victims by positing that indigenous people were innately barbaric savages, unworthy of their lands and too inferior to even have any place in the new society that was attempting to replace theirs, not even as the lowest type of worker. Spanish colonialism went a different way. Not because the Spanish were more moral or anything, they obviously were not, and I've made a video where I talk about the brutality of Spanish colonialism at length. Rather, it's just that their approach to exploiting their colonies was different to that of the British, as they controlled and administered them much more directly, rather than allowing them to be a more autonomous population of settlers under their dominion. Settling in the Spanish colonies was highly limited and controlled. It required permission from the crown, permission that was usually only given to people they deemed necessary. There was no relatively open migration of settlers, no promises of fertile lands ripe for the taking by anyone. Nothing of the sort. This system meant that there were far fewer European settlers than in the British colonies, which made it a lot more difficult to justify the total exclusion of indigenous people from the new society. Without begrudgingly including the indigenous people or some other solution, they would never remotely have enough workers, and there were far too few Europeans for it to be possible for them to enforce outright and openly declared slavery on such a large population of indigenous people all across an entire continent. So these differing approaches to extracting economic value from their colonies resulted in different situations. The British-derived settler colonies, with their much larger European settler populations, ended up with completely exclusionary, white supremacist ideologies. Non-white people were considered to have absolutely no place in society whatsoever, except as slaves. Thus, the workforce ended up being comprised almost entirely of European settlers themselves, supplemented for a long time by millions of African slaves who were forced to do much of the less desirable work, like backbreaking farm labor. This African slave labor was preferred over indigenous labor, in large part because the Africans were not viewed as having a competing claim to the land that could pose a threat to settler society. So almost all indigenous people were instead systematically mass murdered or confined to so-called reservations with the goal of eventual erasure of their societies. On the other hand, the Spanish-derived colonies ended up with a system of white supremacist racial hierarchy, which did not really entirely exclude anyone, but rather limited their position in society based on their race. To summarize it very simply, whites were on top, indigenous people were somewhere in the middle, and black people, who initially were almost all slaves, were at the very bottom. This system was not entirely rigid, and there were exceptions which were allowed out of necessity to enable it to function. For example, some indigenous groups collaborated closely with the Spanish in exchange for higher status within the colonial hierarchy. Again, to be clear, these different systems did not develop out of better morals and virtues, but rather just due to differing approaches to colonial economic exploitation. So how is this relevant to the history of racism in Argentina? Well, because this resulted in an extremely different situation, with extremely different demographics, and thus an extremely different independence movement to that of the USA. The US independence movement was that of a white supremacist settler colony that was, with shockingly little dissent, committed to maintaining its racist system post-independence. Not just that, but also even to expanding this system across the entire width of the continent at the expense of even more indigenous peoples. And indigenous and black people in North America knew this, which is why far more of them fought on the British side in the American War of Independence. The settlers were the ones who were way more directly genociding them and enslaving them, so to them, the British Empire was the clear lesser evil for them. For them, American independence only meant that things would get even worse, and things very much did right afterwards. But in the Spanish colonies, the opposite was true. There, the independence movements were overwhelmingly committed to abolishing the Spanish colonial system of legalized racial discrimination. Since the vast majority of the population was not white, the independence movements would have had absolutely no chance of succeeding without their support, as without them, there was no way they could form an army, let alone create new independent countries afterwards. So non-white people in the Spanish Americas had actual political capital, which made it a necessity for any successful independence movement to at least pretend to appeal to them. This made it almost impossible for the mostly white leadership of these independence movements to implement openly racist policy, even if they had wanted to. If they did not promise to abolish or at least improve upon the Spanish system of legal racial hierarchy, their movement would have been dead in the water. This situation meant that there were many independence leaders who were very notably different to those of the USA, where pretty much every single significant independence figure was a committed ideological racist. In Argentina, some of them could even be said to have been anti-racist, or at least very racially tolerant for their time, far more than can be said for the US. The most prominent leader of the Argentine independence movement, who is also usually credited as the leader of Peruvian independence and as one of the main leaders of Chilean independence, was José de San Martín. He's kind of like Argentina and Peru's George Washington figure. San Martín was a descendant of the Spanish colonial administrator class. This gave him the privilege of being able to go to Spain to be educated and undertake military training. He also fought in the Spanish military against Napoleon's armies, gaining experience there. He was inspired by all of the new political ideas that he learned about in Europe, so when he returned to South America, he immediately offered his services to the burgeoning independence movement, and he very quickly rose through the ranks to become its main military leader. San Martín was quite anti-racist for a rich white guy of his time. One of his most famous quotes is a rant against rich whites who had refused to allow him to conscript their family members into the independentist army. The rich and the landowners refuse to fight. They don't want to send their sons to battle. They tell me that in their place, they'll send me free slaves for each son instead, just so that they don't have to pay the fine. They say that it's all the same to them, whether we keep being a colony or not, while their sons stay home, fat and comfortable. One day, it will be known that this country was freed by the poor, by the sons of the poor, by our Indians and by our blacks, who will never go back to being slaves. And this is pretty indicative of how he conducted himself in general. His most famous military endeavor, for example, was the crossing of the Andes Mountains to liberate Chile from royalist troops. This was carried out with an army that is estimated to have been around 40 to 50% black, with the rest of its troops being mostly indigenous and mixed race. An army composition reflective of the demographics of Argentina at the time. San Martín also made of promoting non-white soldiers to ranks that they were prohibited from holding in the Spanish military, including allowing them to be officers. He once also stated that he considered black infantrymen to be better soldiers than whites. San Martín was also respectful of indigenous independence and land ownership in a way that the North Americans definitely were not. Whenever his army had to cross indigenous land, he would request permission from local indigenous leaders to do so, treating them like equal, independent sovereign nations. A direct witness to one of these meetings said that San Martín, when asking the Pehuenche people for permission to pass through their land to cross the Andes and attack the Spanish in Chile, said, "I've brought you all here today because I need to inform you that the Spaniards plan to cross over from Chile and kill all Indians they come across and steal your land. Because of this, and given that I myself am also an Indian, I am going to defeat the Spaniards who have robbed you of the lands of your ancestors. I need to cross the Andes with my army and our cannons." There is some speculation as to what exactly he meant by "I am also an Indian," whether he meant that he himself was mixed race, or he just meant to show metaphoric solidarity with them. But whatever the intended meaning, the Pehuenche people were convinced by the speech, as they gave him that permission to pass, donated livestock to his army, and also offered their help in battle if needed. However, the South American independence movement was not united in its political thought. It was a mishmash of influential military leaders and powerful elites spanning an entire continent, all vying for their own interests, looking out for themselves and their own regions mainly, and hoping to come out on top once the Spanish were kicked out. So some regions had leaders who were more racist than others, and there were different competing visions for the future. Nonetheless, most of the provinces under control of the independentists, which would later become part of Argentina, decreed the gradual abolition of slavery in the 1810s by banning the slave trade and declaring that anyone born to a slave from that date onwards would be free. This was not the true abolition of slavery, but it at least gave the system an expiration date. So in this environment of competing leaders and interests, and different things going on in different provinces, San Martin was something of an outcast, as he was mostly a military leader without much actual political power besides that anywhere. He was not a big landowner or a big political thought leader, and most of his leverage came from the fact that people who did hold such power had trusted him to run their military. So his ideas for the future were not shared by everyone, and the only thing that everyone in the independence movement really agreed on was their opposition to the Spanish crown. San Martin was much more preoccupied with fighting a decade-long, continent-spanning military campaign than with governance, so he didn't really have the ability to outright abolish slavery or dictate laws in most places. He did at least offer freedom to any slaves who he came across, though under the condition they join the military for a 2-year period first. Obviously, you're not actually free yet if you're forced into military service first, but it still took some guts to do that on his part, given the immense collective power of the slave-holding landowners who were very much against even the gradual abolition of slavery, who received no compensation for this, and still far better than in the USA, where such a possibility didn't even exist. The one time that San Martin did exercise governmental power was not in Argentina, however. It was in the city of Lima, Peru, which was under his mandate from 1821 to 1823. This can give us a limited idea of what he might have done if he had ended up as a political leader rather than mostly a military one. While he was primarily concerned with the military campaign against the Spanish, which would not end until 1824, he still passed laws in Peru, which fundamentally altered the previous racist norms of the Spanish colonial system. He declared equality before the law, removing racial distinctions entirely, and immediately abolished all remnants of the Spanish labor conscription system against indigenous people. He erred on the outright abolition of full-on slavery, though, instead decreeing that all children from then on would be born free, and that any slaves who stepped foot into Peruvian territory from elsewhere would automatically be freed. His simple declaration of racial equality before the law, without organizing any compensation or restitution to go along with it, would be something of a problem later on, as these new laws were inherited by the governments who took power after his brief rule, and they used the lack of on-paper race-based discrimination as an excuse to ignore the still terrible situation of indigenous people. The excuse went that according to the law, they were technically already equal, so there was nothing more to fix. So San Martin's governorship over Peru was reluctant, short, and hardly perfect, but he still got quite a bit done overall in a very short time frame. Taken as a whole, everything that we know about his views and actions regarding race indicates that he was a lot better than the vast majority of other white leaders of his time, probably all of them really, and he clearly had an inclusive racial vision for the future of the Latin American continent, in stark contrast to the completely exclusive, genocidal white supremacist ideology of the North Americans. He also envisioned a completely united South American continent, with no distinction between the countries that comprise it today, with no slavery, and equal rights for all, and perhaps even, given what we know about his dealings with the still independent indigenous peoples of his day, respect for indigenous self-determination. I actually went looking for even just an offhanded racist quote from San Martin, and I couldn't find one. So for a white leader of his time period, the fact that it seems pretty hard to even find him saying anything racist is pretty surprising and welcome. If anything, the totality of his comments and actions suggests the exact opposite. that he was quite anti-racist, which puts him far above most other leaders of his time. His views are well summarized by the fact that he once referred to indigenous people as our countrymen, the Indians, making it clear that he considered them to be his compatriots rather than competitors. So that's basically a quick summary of the racial outlook of the George Washington figure of Argentina, who, I think it's fair to say, was a more admirable figure than the actual George Washington, unless you're racist. Two other Argentine independence figures of note who are worth contrasting with their American counterparts are Martin Miguel de Güemes and Manuel Belgrano. Güemes was a military commander in the north of Argentina who led a mixed-race guerrilla militia against the Spanish crown in the region. This militia was largely comprised of gauchos, mixed-race ranch workers, and indigenous people. He was wildly popular among the predominantly non-white majority of the area, whose support for him was strong enough that it allowed his informal army to beat much better trained and equipped Spanish armies many times over. Eventually, in 1821, the Spanish...
Basically, copy what Argentina had done 200 years ago. Look, okay. I am not fucking gigabrained enough to fucking... like, you know the meme of that fucking... that guy from... what is it? Oh, fucking, what is it? What's that movie? That movie about the bachelor party or whatever, where they go to Vegas... and Zach Galifianakis is like sitting at the fucking blackjack table and all those like mathematical symbols are just like, you know, swirling around his head. I cannot do that right now. Okay? I cannot do that. I'm only going to talk about what's happening right now.
took advantage of a brief regional civil war to launch a surprise attack that assassinated him. Güemes was also supported by Belgrano in his passing and enforcement of what was called the Fuero Gaucho, a set of laws implemented and enforced by Güemes and Belgrano, which liberated the gauchos from forced labor and declared them equal citizens. This is part of the reason why Güemes was assassinated by landowners who sided with the Spanish because they were angry about this law. While not as important of a figure as someone like San Martin, he still must be mentioned, as he is another Argentine independence leader who was very popular among the masses, and who did not care very much at all about race, at a time when racism was all the rage in North America. And his army, like most Argentine independence armies, was full of the non-white people that made up much of the population of the time. Manuel Belgrano, mostly known in Argentina for designing the flag, also did way more besides just that. He was probably the second most significant military commander of the Argentine independence struggle, but unlike San Martin, he does actually have a couple of well-known racist quotes. For example, he once had a written argument with San Martin, in which San Martin argued that black soldiers were capable and essential to the war effort, while Belgrano blamed the supposed cowardice of some of his black soldiers for some of his defeats. However, there is also record of Belgrano promoting a black woman to the rank of captain, something almost unheard of at the time for black men, let alone women. Belgrano also made proclamations abolishing most of the racist laws of the Spanish legal system pretty much everywhere that he exercised effective control as his armies advanced. It's certain that at least some of this was done for pragmatic reasons rather than simple, genuine ideological anti-racism. After all, freeing indigenous people from forced labor for the Spanish and liberating them from paying taxes to the Spanish had obvious utility when you were fighting the Spanish. But this was still far better than the USA, which was insanely ideologically racist, to the extent that such endeavors, even for pragmatic reasons, were borderline unthinkable there. Manuel Belgrano was also the architect of what was called the Inca Plan, the idea that, post-independence, a vast united country should be formed that would encompass at least modern-day Peru, Bolivia, Chile, Argentina, Paraguay, and Uruguay. This country would be ruled as a parliamentary monarchy in the style of the United Kingdom, with a descendant of the former Incan monarchy as head of state, and the historical Incan seat of power, Cusco, as its capital. This is clearly not the sort of idea that one would expect from committed, ideological white supremacists. At a time when the USA was actively deporting and massacring any indigenous people who they came across to steal their land, some of the most important Argentine leaders were seriously proposing submitting themselves to an indigenous ruler. And I mean seriously, because this wasn't just some throwaway proposal that he scribbled on a note once or something. It was a legitimately popular idea that a lot of important people backed. It was even put forth at a congress between representatives from every province, where decisions were to be made regarding the future of the independence movement and the character of the country that they were hoping to form. It was also hotly debated in the media and among the general public, with practically every independence figure of the time weighing in. It was supported by, among others, San Martin and Güemes, and the latter even published a newspaper column where he threatened those who opposed the plan, saying that he would go to war against anyone who attempted to impede its implementation. A pretty serious threat from one of the major military leaders of the time to literally go to war for the sake of installing an indigenous sovereign to rule his country from a traditional indigenous city. Their reason for supporting this plan was more complicated, of course, than them just being awesome people who were anti-racist and who wanted equality for everyone. San Martin and Belgrano were in agreement that such a massive country, like the one that they were hoping to form, would only remain united under a strong, centralized leadership, and they believed that a monarch to act as a uniting figure was needed for such an endeavor. They also hoped that the gesture of reinstituting an indigenous monarchy would draw broad support from the massive indigenous and mixed-race population for the new nation, and signal to them that it was to be a departure from the exploitation they suffered under Spanish rule, and also help to make voluntarily joining this new nation more appealing to the still independent indigenous peoples that remained. It was also a way of signaling to Europe that South America meant business, as having their own monarch would be a symbol of their ambitions to deal with Europe on an equal footing, and it would help South America to appeal to them more as a trading destination, as it was thought that they would prefer to deal with one strong central government, rather than the chaotic situation where there were many dozens of individual regions, all with their own separate governments and power struggles, which is how things had been since the independence struggle began. The point is, though, if they had been committed ideological racists, like the leaders and the society of the British-derived settler colonies, this is something that they never would have entertained, not even for pragmatic reasons. But they very much entertained it, and they did so very seriously. Now, I am unfortunately not living under the rule of a benevolent philosopher king, Incan emperor, reigning over me from the glorious capital Cusco over the one single unified nation of Ecuador, Peru, Bolivia, Paraguay, Chile, Argentina, Uruguay. So clearly, this plan was never implemented. So what happened? Well, elites from the extremely powerful province of Buenos Aires wanted to make sure that they themselves would be the capital of any future state, so they were thus completely against being ruled from Cusco. So they did everything that they could to delay further official discussion on the proposal until it was no longer practical, and this strategy worked. Its main proponents, Belgrano and Güemes, died before the South American Wars of Independence were over, and San Martin, whose support would have been crucial for the success of the proposal, exiled himself to Europe in 1824 under suspicious circumstances following a secret meeting with his Venezuelan counterpart, Simón Bolívar. So the Inca plan was basically defeated by attrition, as all of its most important backers were out of the picture within a decade of its conception. This conflict between the interests of the elites of Buenos Aires against the other provinces would come to characterize the rest of the 19th century in Argentina. Said conflict was so serious that Argentina did not even become a unified country under that name until 1861. Nearly 40 years after the pivotal Battle of Ayacucho in 1824, which definitively kicked the Spanish out of South America, all because Argentina was stuck, embroiled in a long period of civil wars within civil wars. Buenos Aires was an incredibly powerful port province, positioned right at the estuary to one of the most important rivers on the continent. It also has much of the best arable land in the region. This created a situation where the elites of Buenos Aires, mostly large agricultural landowners and merchants, had massive coercive power over the other provinces, as everyone else needed access to both the river and the port for their most basic necessities, and Buenos Aires was able to deny them those things whenever it wanted. So for decades following independence, the region was embroiled in civil wars and power struggles between many different different provinces and their leaders, who also often fought amongst themselves as well. But broadly speaking, they were usually split into two groups. The Unitarians, who wanted Buenos Aires to have
is this a working stream or are you extremely working? No, I mean, what's up? What's up, Nerdity? How you doing? Yeah, I'm working right now. I'm just kind of listening to this in the background. I got some stuff to do.
special privileges.
I'm just enjoying watching you guys argue.
That would ensure the dominance of its elites in any future unified country, and the Federalists, who wanted to form a country where every province was equal, with equal and fair access to the use and rents of the port of Buenos Aires. These two sides were also quite ideologically opposed. The Unitarians, who were primarily concerned with securing special privileges for a tiny group of economic elites of just one province, gravitated towards the American and British-style liberalism of their day, including its racist and colonialist aspects. Their political ideology was basically just, since we think it'll be best for us personally, let's copy the USA, racism and all. Except the federalism part, of course. The Federalists, on the other hand, sought equality for the provinces, which also made it common for them to be more open to equality in other spheres as well. The economic power of Buenos Aires was immense, and the elites of the other provinces had little chance to match it, even when they were united. So the only way that they had any chance of defeating Buenos Aires was by appealing more to normal people, and using their support to overwhelm Buenos Aires with sheer numbers. Thus, they were also typically less racist out of necessity. So the Unitarians quickly came to mostly favor mass white European migration for explicitly ideological racist reasons, and they were repulsed by the way that the Federalists often pulled their support from all parts of society, while the Federalists themselves were not really concerned with the racial makeup of the future country. This civil conflict between the Unitarians and the Federalists is sometimes erroneously boiled down to just being about the greed of Buenos Aires versus the other provinces. But that's a great simplification of what it really was. It was really a conflict about who this future country would be for, one of elitism and racism versus one of unity by necessity. And there is no figure who better demonstrates this, both in his actions and in the way that he was subsequently mythologized, than Juan Manuel de Rosas, who was the first big-time post-independence power holder of the region. Rosas was handed power in Buenos Aires in 1829, initially being voted in by the other elites as their representative. He was an extremely rich and powerful landowner from Buenos Aires, so he was originally a Unitarian, as you'd expect. But he was also an extremely power-hungry opportunist, and he had ambitions to rule with an iron fist over all the other elites of Buenos Aires. He recognized that if he was to become the most powerful leader in the province, political maneuvering and scheming in the world of the elite would not be enough. He needed the masses on his side. If they joined him and fought for him willingly, that would give him the manpower and legitimacy to crush the racist Unitarian liberal elites who were his rivals for power. And that's precisely what he did. He became a federalist, suddenly, opportunistically, and instituted a dictatorship which, for the first time in the history of the region, attempted to gain wide support from the majority of the population, which, naturally, meant appealing to non-white people. He used this support to legitimize and enable his brutal oppression of his political opponents. But you shouldn't shed any tears for most of them, as they were racist liberals who were a whole lot worse than he was. Rosas was an opportunist rather than someone ideologically motivated, so it's not that he was a super mega principled anti-racist, it's rather that all he really cared about was that he be the one in power, and being anti-racist helped him with that at the time. This is demonstrated by the fact that while he was quite popular among non-white people, he still decided to briefly re-establish the slave trade for a 2-year period from 1831 to 33, something that he got away with among his black supporters because he only imported slaves from elsewhere, rather than re-enslaving black Argentines. He also orchestrated one of the first large-scale indigenous massacres in Argentine history in 1833, when he led a military campaign that killed at least a couple thousand Rangel and Mapuche people in Argentina's interior. This massacre was not mainly racially motivated though, as Rosas also worked with and respected the independence of other indigenous groups, provided that they didn't get in his way, of course. That's in contrast to later genocides of indigenous people in Argentina and in the US in other places, which were carried out for explicitly racist reasons, like indigenous people in general being considered inferior barriers to progress who were genetically unworthy of their lands, and other such generic European colonial justifications. Opportunistic and self-serving as it may have been, Rosas and his followers still used clear anti-racist rhetoric that was almost unimaginable from the people who held actual power in the USA or other British-derived colonies until much later. An illustrative example of this comes from 1843, when an article in Rosas's official newspaper responded to the charge against his family levied in a rival Unitarian newspaper that he, shock, horror, had allowed his daughter to dance with black men. Rather than deny the allegation, he embraced it. The Pardos and the Mulattos, mixed-race people, are in no way unworthy. On the contrary, they are needed and considered by General Rosas, just as the Morenos and the Africans are, as sons of the fatherland, valiant defenders of liberty who have won fame and glory in 100 battles in which they have maintained our national independence against all foreign domination and against these savage Unitarians, who are themselves unworthy to even rub shoulders with the Pardos and Morenos. General Rosas so appreciates them that he has no objection to seating them at his table and eating with them, for which the Unitarians have attempted to mock him, reproaching him because his daughter shows no reluctance to dance on certain occasions with the honest and hard-working mulattoes, pardos, and morenos. Reading this, it's really not hard at all to see why Rosas was so popular among the masses, in contrast to the other elites of Buenos Aires who were, at this time, literally writing articles calling for the reinstatement of slavery because the freed slaves were demanding high wages for domestic work. One such article, published just a year after Rosas was deposed in 1852, explicitly blamed Rosas for having uplifted black people too much, to the point that now they thought themselves too good to be domestic workers. The article's proposed solution to this was that the government re-enslave them and rent them out to rich families as servants. So Rosas ruled Buenos Aires, which naturally made him the most powerful political leader in the land that would later become Argentina for most of the period from 1829 to 1852, and he was largely enabled in doing so by the simple fact that he was happy to embrace the vast majority of the population who his opponents openly disdained. Once he was brought down, he went into exile, which was quite a tragedy for Argentina, as he was then followed by a succession of opponents from the openly racist liberal elites, who then controlled the country with an iron fist for the next 70 to 80.
Oh yeah, there's something. What was it that? What was it? I saw something about that. Yeah, I get like these communist types that like pop up in my algo also. I got the algo is just like the algo is ultra far right shit, ultra far left shit, guitars, food, Japanese girls, golf, hockey, and stuff about Miami. Basically, these guys are leading the revolution though.
I'm here with communist students from across the Wales and the West to officially launch the start of the campaign where I'll be running for Student Union President at Cardiff University. I'm running on a communist program, so our first demand is kick capitalism off campus. This means an end to the marketisation and privatisation of education. Our second demand is no more cuts, open the books. If management says there's no money, then we say prove it. The final demand is for student and worker control of the university. It's the students and workers who run the uni, not management on sky-high salaries. If you agree with the demands, then you should vote for me for Student Union President. I would use my position to help build a movement by linking up the struggles of students and workers across the uni, across the higher education sector, so we can kick capitalism out of education once and for all.
These are the types that are going to be fucking up against the wall once they let all the Chi-Coms in. Patients running the asylum will work? Yeah, exactly. Yep.
years, and who were dead set on molding Argentina to their ideological whims. It bears mentioning that Argentina was not anything resembling a democracy in this period.
Okay. This is about halfway through. How long's that Sargon video, Conrad? $30 cool. Yeah, we can watch that. I don't know. If you guys thought that was interesting, we can watch the rest of it another time. I think I absorbed like half of it. I've just been like too focused on what I'm working on here. The end of internationalism. Oh, there we go. There we go. A little bit of Sam Harris. Nice. Nice. Did you see my meme, Shane Gang? Did you see my meme I tagged you in?
We have here a truly fascinating video in which Sam Harris, I nearly said Sam Hyde, the secular, liberal, atheist, Jewish, new atheist, finds himself uncomfortably concluding that actually Israel ought to exist as a kind of ethno-religious state for the Jewish people, because there are real-world implications for being a stateless people that actually aren't very desirable. And so this, as he says, Glenn Greenwald points out, he always made Israel an exception to his atheism in opposition to organizing based on religious sectarian identity. The thing is, the Jewish identity isn't really just religious. It's a lot thicker and deeper than that. It's an ethno-cultural religious identity. And so, obviously, Jewish people who aren't religious are still Jewish, even though they don't follow the faith. And so Sam is one of those people, and yet he still feels an ancestral tie, because this is about tribes. This is about tribalism. This is about what tribe do you belong to, even if you don't agree with everything that tribe says and does. And in Sam's case, it's, of course, being a Jew. And in my case, it is being English. In Count Dankula's case, it's being Scottish. This is just what humans are like. Humans belong to tribes. And this is the secular liberal atheist realizing that actually the things he believed about how the world should be organized are pie in the sky nonsense. And actually it's not going to work. And actually the world's a dangerous place. And unless every single person on earth agrees with you, and agrees with you 100%, then this can't work. This whole project was a dreamlike, unworkable fantasy, and the attack on October the 7th proves it. This is just something that can happen if you don't have a secure state with secure borders that is controlled, that is under the jurisdiction of one people, one collective entity, known as, in his case, the Jewish people, in my case, the English people, in France's case, the French people, etc., etc. Let's watch some of this.
Sam Harris explains this week that as a Jewish person, he always had an Israel exception to his atheism and opposition to organizing based on religious sectarian identity, even if he was conflicted about it. But he says he now fully subordinates his other views to Zionism.
Shall we?
And I think before October 7th, you could have said that I was not a Zionist, right? Or I certainly would be willing to call into question the legitimacy of organizing a state around a religion or a religiously identified ethnicity, right? Judaism in this case. I think I released a podcast some years ago titled, "Why Don't I Criticize Israel?"
Yeah, it was 10 years ago.
Yeah, and there I gave a fairly equivocal and frustrating defense of Israel, but I was troubled by.
I didn't notice my fucking screen was still up. There we go.
As someone who believes.
Just a quick pause there. If I recall correctly, he argues on the case of Israel being a secular liberal democracy, right? Or at least the closest thing you can get to a secular liberal democracy in the Middle East.
He does, and I remember that. That was part of the. So his podcast is now called Making Sense, but it used to be called Waking Up, I believe, which once he started his meditation app, he just basically transferred the Waking Up brand to the app, and he renamed his podcast Making Sense. But back when it was Waking Up, he did do like this kind of monologue about why he supports Israel. And just adding on top of what Sargon's talking about there, like one of the reasons he justified it is because he essentially, makes this argument that, if you gave Palestinians or Muslims or Middle Easterners outside of Israel in general, nuclear weapons, all of the strongest military equipment, whatever, they would definitively use it to destroy Israel. Whereas Israel has had all of that stuff for a very long time and, has not used it to basically destroy their neighbors. So it's kind of like this benevolence argument. That's one of the points that he made, was essentially that Israel's benevolent, that they've had this kind of capability for a long time and they choose not to use it against their neighbors. Whereas their neighbors, if they had the same kind of capability, wouldn't hesitate one moment to use it against Israel. Now, I'm not saying that's right or wrong. I'm just telling you what he said from that monologue that he did about this. Move to a world where skin color is as relevant as hair color. Yeah. That's pretty much a direct quote there. Anyone even further saying things like, we need to move past the bias parents have for their children. Oh, well, yeah. That's, I don't know about that one. Like, that was the level of his anti-racism. Father should but be biased in favor of his son. And yet he's a nationalist, not for America, but Israel. Why? Because he's Jewish? Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of conflict there. But yeah, I do remember this narrative that Sargon's talking about. I remember specifically. Maybe we'll listen to it. It's not. I don't even think it's that long.
That protects women's rights, gay rights, etc., etc. It's been 10 years since I did listen to it years ago. It's been a long time, but there was always the question of an kind of implicit bias that underpinned it, right? Again, you can give the ideological rationale for anything all you want, but if there is a non-rational emotive connection that you might have based on something like ethnicity, then you can say whatever you like, but there's always going to be that exception, and you'll carve out the exception for the thing you, in your heart of hearts, believe is actually good and true and ought to exist. And so really we can see the top layer of reason here was, as Hume put it, the slave of the passions. Jonathan Haidt puts it, the rider making excuses for what the elephant has already done. The elephant has decided, no, I'm obviously going to make an exception for Israel. Now I have to figure out why. And that is destroying Sam Harris's rationalistic liberal worldview. He has to admit, actually, this is kind of about identity.
That we are paying this intolerable price for sectarianism. I was troubled by the seeming contradiction in defending the Jewish state, and for me it just nets out to the only real defense is the ambient level of genocidal intolerance that's directed at Jews, right? I mean, just and yet before October 7th.
So the ambient level of genocidal intent that's directed at Jews. Well, as if there isn't an ambient level of genocidal intent directed at Europeans or Americans. I mean, there are whole disciplines in academia dedicated to destroying whiteness and white supremacy, what he would, I think, more fairly characterize as the national jurisdiction of a people over their own homeland. This, as he concedes in the case of Israel and the Jews, is valid because the world is a dangerous place. I mean, there's a whole, like I said, a whole discipline of thoughts that's geared around dispossessing all Western European nations of their ancestral claim to their own homelands. This is the decolonization movement. It's got a whole pattern of thought, like body of thought behind it. And so to sit there and say, well, it would be dangerous for Jewish people because, I mean, there might be terror attacks. Well, there are terror attacks here. There are terror attacks in America. There are terror attacks all over Europe. So it's dangerous for us too. So this, we have to concede, means that if there are people who are trying to kill us, then we should keep a strong boundary and border between them and us. And actually bringing them in doesn't make much sense. In fact, it seems to be kind of suicidal. And if Sam can take that opinion with Israel and Jewish people, I think that's completely reasonable, especially given what happened on October the 7th. So we can take that opinion, and the English people, in my particular case, especially given what happened on 7/7, or on the Manchester Arena bombing, or the London Bridge attack, or the various car of peace attacks and trucks of peace attacks that have happened, or the grooming gangs and things like this, all these things that are a continual state of that create a continual state of tension because they are attacks on the most vulnerable areas of our society, as if to try and destroy the society entirely, which, again, I concede completely. That's what Hamas was trying to do on October the 7th. So why can't we use that same principle over here? Why can't Germany? I mean, Germany gets it so bad, man. Why can't Germany take the principle too? The thing is, Sam Harris would probably actually agree, rationally, if you put this to him. Because he would say, well, yeah, I mean, I guess that is the case. I was just thinking of it from my perspective as a Jewish man who's concerned about a homeland for Jews and is concerned about the terror attacks that go on against Jews, because there is a lot of anti-Semitic rhetoric out there, no question of it. So actually, wouldn't it be better, instead of being sort of the liberal atheist globalist who's like, well, I don't really want to be burdened by religions. And the thing is about religions is that they always have a kind of ethno-cultural substrate to them. Like every tribe has its own gods, right? Rather than wanting the world not to be burdened by religions and trying to destroy religions, wouldn't it just make more sense if each tribe had its own homeland? Wouldn't it make more sense if each tribe just had a place on the earth where it belonged and that it had jurisdiction over, so it could fulfill the commandments of its own religion, whether this is an actual religion or just a strongly held set of moral values? Every tribe has one, a normative model of the universe. Wouldn't it be better if every tribe could just make the world as they thought it ought to be in their own territory and protect their borders soundly if... in order to make sure that even if another tribe doesn't like it, not our problem. You stay on your side of the fence, we stay on our side of the fence, and we can all live and let live. That seems to be the only way that diversity could actually work. And if you were going to look at the world as through a global lens, isn't that what multiculturalism actually means? What it would actually look like is you would have separate and discrete cultures that had their own territory and that had their own claim to it that someone else didn't have.
Even there, I felt like I was paying lip service to the legacy of the Holocaust without really having, my heart was really not quite in it, because it still seemed kind of hypothetical to me, because in my life, anti-Semitism has not seemed like a real variable at all. And apart from the Islamist version of it, it seemed to have been, more or less fully defanged, the world over. But given October 7th, and given the response to it in the West, both on the left and on the right politically, but even most especially on the left, I mean, that was the most surprising. Yeah, I'm really, just kind of an unapologetic Zionist at this point. I just say,
what is fascinating about this is that Sam Harris lived through 9/11. Like, Sam was an adult when 9/11 happened, and much of his career was built on the idea that, well, Muslims did 9/11, therefore Islam is a really bad religion. And again, to their credit, the New Atheists, for all of their faults, did consider Islam to be the worst of the Abrahamic religions. They did at least say, look, we shouldn't be having all these Muslims in. And yet, Sam didn't feel the same way about America being, for 3,000 people dying on 9/11, he didn't feel the same way about America being attacked than he did with 1,300 people being killed on October the 7th in Israel. This, to him, has made him an unapologetic Zionist, but it didn't make him an unapologetic American nationalist. Even though, honestly, I would have thought he would have felt far stronger about the United States than he does about Israel, but apparently he doesn't. And so this is just very, very interesting. But the thing is, there are lots of anti-Semites online, but I don't consider myself to be one of them. What I think is actually kind of reasonable is what Jews and Israel are asking for themselves, which is, this is ours, and we're going to defend it. I actually view that as a very reasonable proposition, that Jewish people should move to Israel, live there, defend it, and be happy there, right? Because, like, the English have an Israel of their own, and it's England, and it's being taken away from us, and we don't want that. And so I find myself quite sympathetic on this note. Yeah, no, I agree, you should have that, and we should have this. Jews should be sovereign in Israel, and the English should be sovereign in England, and that means that we get to decide the moral norms and the way that the culture, that the society itself functions, based on our preferences, as you do in your country with your preferences. I think that's all completely fair, and I just don't see how you can take exception to that, to be honest.
Like, who can be counted upon to defend the Jews but the Jews? I think that's a question that for which you have to err on the side of the most cynical and depressing answer, which is, only the Jews can at the end of the day be counted upon to defend themselves.
And that goes for anyone, right? Like, it's kind of crazy that he would even wonder if another people is going to be tasked with defending the Jews. Why would they be? Why shouldn't you've got a Jewish state? Obviously, Jewish people should be tasked with defending themselves. Again, in every other nation, that's how this works. That's what nation states are for. The collective defense of the people as a people. That's the point of them. And so it weird. I wouldn't rely on anyone to defend the British or the English, other than the British and the English. Like I just obviously I'm not going to rely on the Russians or something, or like the French or the Germans for Britain's defence. Unlike our fucking government, obviously we're the ones who have to rely on ourselves. And it's this is definitely the same standard that he's applying to Israel. So let's apply it here. That we can be possessive over our own countries. We can make sure that we are very particular and discriminating about who we let in, and we can just eject the people that we don't want in, because actually it belongs to us, in the same way that Israel has that privilege with Jewish people have that privilege when it comes to Israel. I'm totally on board with these principles and the way that nation states should work. Like this kind of Sam Harris nationalism, sure, I'm up for it. Completely agree with it, in fact. But what I like about this is that the old internationalist liberal view that was held in the late 90s and 2000s, that's gone now, right? Like you can see that is gone. Those scales have fallen from Sam's eyes and gone, no, we need Jewish nationalism. And everyone else needs their nationalism too.
And everyone else.
Hey everybody, thanks very much for joining.
And everyone else needs their nationalism too. Yeah. Ironic Britain expected USA and Soviet to protect their country in World War II. There you go. Actually. This is a while ago. Let me find it real quick. Oh, what? This is it. Why don't criticize Israel? How long is this? Oh, this is this is only like 16 minutes. So this is that is Sam Harris an American? Does he want to be part of the political and cultural destiny of the United States? I think so. I think so. Did he change his podcast name from Waking Up to new name because Waking Up is woke? Oh, interesting. Yeah, could be, could be. This is that This is that episode that Sargon was talking about, though.
I was going to do a podcast on a series of questions, but I got so many questions on the same topic that I think I'm just going to do a single response here, and we'll do an Ask Me Anything podcast next time. The question I've now received in many forms goes something like this. Why is it that you never criticize Israel? Why is it that you never criticize Judaism? Why is it that you always take the side of the Israelis over that of the Palestinians? Now, this is an incredibly boring and depressing question for a variety of reasons. The first is that I have criticized Israel and Judaism. What seems to upset many people is I've kept some sense of proportion. There's something like 15 million Jews on earth at this moment. There are 100 times as many Muslims. I've debated rabbis who, when I assume that they believe in a God who can hear our prayers, they stop me mid-sentence and say, "Why would you think I believe in a God who can hear prayers?" So there are rabbis, conservative rabbis, who believe in a God so elastic as to exclude every concrete claim about him, and therefore nearly every concrete demand upon human behavior. And there are millions of Jews, literally millions among the few million who exist, for whom Judaism is very important, and yet they are atheists. They don't believe in God at all. This is actually a position you can hold within Judaism, but it's a total non sequitur in Islam or Christianity. So when we're talking about the consequences of irrational beliefs based on Scripture, the Jews are the least of the least offenders. But I have said many critical things about Judaism. Let me remind you that parts of the Hebrew Bible, books like Leviticus and Exodus and Deuteronomy, are the most repellent, the most sickeningly unethical documents to be found in any religion. They're worse than the Quran. They're worse than any part of the New Testament. But the truth is, most Jews recognize this and don't take these texts seriously. It's simply a fact that most Jews and most Israelis are not guided by Scripture, and that's a very good thing. Of course, there are some who are. There are religious extremists among Jews. Now, I consider these people to be truly dangerous, and their religious beliefs are as divisive and as unwarranted as the beliefs of devout Muslims. But there are far fewer such people. For those of you who worry that I never say anything critical about Israel, my position on Israel is somewhat paradoxical. There are questions about which I'm genuinely undecided. And there's something in my position, I think, to offend everyone. So, acknowledging how reckless it is to say anything on this topic, I'm nevertheless going to think out loud about it for a few minutes. I don't think Israel should exist as a Jewish state. I think it is obscene, irrational, and unjustifiable to have a state organized around a religion. So I don't celebrate the idea that there's a Jewish homeland in the Middle East, and I certainly don't support any Jewish claims to real estate based on the Bible. Though I just said that I don't think Israel should exist as a Jewish state, the justification for such a state is rather easy to find. We need look no further than the fact that the rest of the world has shown itself eager to murder the Jews at almost every opportunity. So if there were going to be a state organized around protecting the members of a single religion, it certainly should be a Jewish state. Now, friends of Israel might consider this a rather tepid defense, but it's the strongest one I've got. I think the idea of a religious state is ultimately untenable. Needless to say, in defending its territory as a Jewish state, the Israeli government and Israelis themselves have had to do terrible things. They have, as they are now, fought wars against the Palestinians that have caused massive losses of innocent life. More civilians have been killed in Gaza in the last few weeks than militants. Now, that's not a surprise, given that Gaza is one of the most densely populated places on earth. Occupying it, fighting wars in it, is guaranteed to get women and children and other non-combatants killed. And there's probably little question over the course of fighting multiple wars that the Israelis have done things that amount to war crimes. They have been brutalized by this process, that is, made brutal by it. But that is largely due to the character of their enemies. Whatever terrible things the Israelis have done, it is also true to say that they have used more restraint in their fighting against the Palestinians than we, the Americans and the Europeans, have used in any of our wars. They have endured more worldwide public scrutiny than any society has ever had to while defending itself against aggressors. The Israelis simply are held to a different standard. And the condemnation leveled at them by the rest of the world
is completely out of proportion to what they've actually done. It is clear that Israel is losing the PR war and has been for years now. One of the most galling things for outside observers about the current war in Gaza is the disproportionate loss of life on the Palestinian side. This doesn't make a lot of moral sense. Israel built bomb shelters to protect its citizens. The Palestinians built tunnels through which they could carry out terror attacks and kidnap Israelis. Should Israel be blamed for successfully protecting its population in a defensive war? I don't think so. But there is no way to look at the images coming out of Gaza, especially of infants and toddlers riddled by shrapnel, and think that this is anything other than a monstrous evil. Insofar as the Israelis are the agents of this evil, it seems impossible to support them. And there's no question that the Palestinians have suffered terribly for decades under the occupation. This is where most critics of Israel appear to be stuck. They see these images, and they blame Israel for killing and maiming babies. They see the occupation, and they blame Israel for making Gaza a prison camp. Now, I would argue that this is a kind of moral illusion, born of a failure to look at the actual causes of this conflict, as well as a failure to understand the intentions of the people on either side of it. The truth is that there is an obvious, undeniable, and hugely consequential moral difference between Israel and her enemies. The Israelis are surrounded by people who have explicitly genocidal intentions towards them. The charter of Hamas is explicitly genocidal. It looks forward to a time based on Quranic prophecy when the earth itself will cry out for Jewish blood, where the trees and the stones will say, "O Muslim, there's a Jew behind me, come and kill him." This is a political document. We are talking about a government that was voted into power by a majority of Palestinians. The discourse in the Muslim world about Jews is utterly shocking. Not only is there widespread Holocaust denial, there's Holocaust denial that then asserts, we will do it for real if given the chance. The only thing more obnoxious than denying the Holocaust is to say that it should have happened. It didn't happen, but if we get the chance, we will accomplish it. There are children's shows in the Palestinian territories and elsewhere that teach 5-year-olds about the glories of martyrdom and about the necessity of killing Jews. And this gets to the heart.
I saw. Look, I understand. We can prosecute my definition of an American another night because I don't have the fucking bandwidth. But suffice to say, like I even, after thinking about it, I've still landed on that definition. But at the same time, I've noticed pitfalls in it. Like, so for example, what is the political and cultural destiny of the United States, right? Is it good? Is it bad? Do the Americans that we're defining want to be a part of a good version of that destiny, or do they want to be a bad version of that destiny? There's all kinds of things to think about there. So, believe me, I know. We can definitely, like, how do you actually know who is part of the political destiny of America, especially when people are entire family in other countries and can return comfortably at any time? Yeah, exactly. I know. There's a lot of nuance to observe, and I'm happy to prosecute it or litigate it another night. But I'm trying to finish this thing I'm working on. Yeah, what's up there, bro? How you doing? PPG is wrong. I still have the PPG lies fucking emote. I still have the PPG lies emote, I think. Yeah, dude. I don't know why, but this emote still lives, dude. PPG level lies, dude. It still lives, man. It's like actually still living in Twitch. That's an old Turbo emote, and Turbo's been off Twitch for fucking a long time, but for some reason it's still there. So I fucking, I'll bang that one out every once in a while. Yeah, it's there, dude. For some reason, I don't know why, but it's just stayed there. Like even after you got kicked out or whatever, it's still there. That's on Twitch. That's not on Kick. So yeah, I don't know why it's still there, but you still have emotes on Twitch. Maybe your account's actually maybe your account is actually good. Maybe they rescinded the ban. You should check that out, maybe. I don't know why I'm still able to use that emote. So I have a Zelensky account. Okay. Likely to you had to pay 1,000 bits to get it. Oh, okay, gotcha. I bought it. Okay, there we go. Nice.
Of the moral difference between Israel and her enemies. And this is something I discussed in The End of Faith. To see this moral difference, you must deny idol. It looks forward to a time based on Quranic prophecy when the earth itself will cry out for Jewish blood, where the trees and the stones will say, "Oh Muslim, there's a Jew behind me, come and kill him." This is a political document. We are talking about a government that was voted into power by a majority of Palestinians. The discourse in the Muslim world about Jews is utterly shocking. Not only is there widespread Holocaust denial, there's Holocaust denial that then asserts, we will do it for real if given the chance. The only thing more obnoxious than denying the Holocaust is to say that it should have happened. It didn't happen, but if we get the chance, we will accomplish it. There are children's shows in the Palestinian territories and elsewhere that teach 5-year-olds about the glories of martyrdom and about the necessity of killing Jews. And this gets to the heart of the moral difference between Israel and her enemies. And this is something I discussed in The End of Faith. To see this moral difference, you have to ask what each side would do if they had the power to do it. What would the Jews do to the Palestinians if they could do anything they wanted? Well, we know the answer to that question, because they can do more or less anything they want. The Israeli army could kill everyone in Gaza tomorrow. So what does that mean? Well, it means that when they drop a bomb on a beach and kill 4 Palestinian children, as happened last week, this is almost certainly an accident. They're not targeting children. They could target as many children as they want. Every time a Palestinian child dies, Israel edges ever closer to becoming an international pariah. So the Israelis take great pains not to kill children and other non-combatants. Now, is it possible that some Israeli soldiers go berserk under pressure and wind up shooting into crowds of rock-throwing children? Of course. You will always find some soldiers acting this way in the middle of a war. But we know that this isn't the general intent of Israel. We know that Israelis do not want to kill non-combatants, because they could kill as many as they want, and they're not doing it. What do we know of the Palestinians? What would the Palestinians do to the Jews in Israel if the power imbalance were reversed? Well, they have told us what they would do. For some reason, Israel's critics just don't want to believe the worst about a group like Hamas, even when it declares the worst of itself. We've already had a Holocaust and several other genocides in the 20th century. People are capable of committing genocide. When they tell us they intend to commit genocide, we should listen. There is every reason to believe that the Palestinians would kill all the Jews in Israel if they could. Would every Palestinian support genocide? Of course not. But vast numbers of them, and of Muslims throughout the world, would. Needless to say, Palestinians in general, and not just Hamas, have a history of targeting innocent non-combatants in the most shocking ways possible. They've blown themselves up on buses and in restaurants. They've massacred teenagers. They've murdered Olympic athletes. They now shoot rockets indiscriminately into civilian areas. And again, the charter of their government in Gaza explicitly tells us that they want to annihilate the Jews, not just in Israel, but everywhere. The truth is that everything you need to know about the moral imbalance between Israel and her enemies can be understood on the topic of human shields. Who uses human shields? Well, Hamas certainly does. They shoot their rockets from residential neighborhoods, from beside schools and hospitals and mosques. Muslims in other recent conflicts in Iraq and elsewhere have used human shields. They have laid their rifles on the shoulders of their own children and shot from behind their bodies. Consider the moral difference between using human shields and being deterred by them. That is the difference we're talking about. The Israelis and other Western powers are deterred, however imperfectly, by the Muslim use of human shields in these conflicts, as we should be. It is morally abhorrent to kill non-combatants if you can avoid it. It's certainly abhorrent to shoot through the bodies of children to get at your adversary. But take a moment to reflect on how contemptible this behavior is, and understand how cynical it is. The Muslims are acting on the assumption, the knowledge in fact, that the infidels with whom they fight, the very people whom their religion does nothing but vilify, will be deterred by their use of Muslim human shields. They consider the Jews to be the spawn of apes and pigs, and yet they rely on the fact that they don't want to kill Muslim non-combatants.
Pretty
Now
sure.
imagine reversing the roles here. Imagine how fatuous, indeed how comical it would be for the Israelis to attempt to use human shields.
Now, after listening to some America First Nick Fuentes fucking podcast, I'm pretty sure don't like really hardcore Jews think the same thing about Christians, basically, because that's like the whole Goyim discourse, and like Jesus is burning in hell and all that.
The knowledge, in fact, that the infidels with whom they fight, the very people whom their religion does nothing but vilify, will be deterred by their use of Muslim human shields. They consider the Jews to be the spawn of apes and pigs, and yet they rely on the fact that they don't want to kill Muslim non-combatants. Now imagine reversing the roles here. Imagine how fatuous, indeed how comical it would be for the Israelis to attempt to use human shields to deter the Palestinians. Some claim that they have already done this. There are reports that Israeli soldiers have occasionally put Palestinian civilians in front of them as they've advanced into dangerous areas. That's not the use of human shields we're talking about. It's egregious behavior. No doubt it constitutes a war crime. But imagine the Israelis holding up their own women and children as human shields. Of course, that would be ridiculous. The Palestinians are trying to kill everyone. Killing women and children is part of the plan. Reversing the roles here produces a grotesque Monty Python skit. If you're going to talk about the conflict in the Middle East, you have to acknowledge this difference. I don't think there's any ethical disparity to be found anywhere that is more shocking or consequential than this. And the truth is, this isn't even the worst that jihadists do. Hamas is practically a moderate organization compared to other jihadist groups. There are Muslims who have blown themselves up in crowds of children, again, Muslim children, just to get at the American soldiers who were handing out candy to them. They have committed suicide bombings only to send another bomber to the hospital to await the casualties, where they then blow up all the injured, along with the doctors and the nurses trying to save their lives. Every day that you read about an Israeli rocket gone astray, or Israeli soldiers beating up an innocent teenager, you could have read about ISIS in Iraq crucifying people on the side of the road, Christians and Muslims. Where is the outrage in the Muslim world and on the left over these crimes? Where are the demonstrations, 10,000, 100,000 deep, in the capitals of Europe against ISIS? If Israel kills a dozen Palestinians by accident, the entire Muslim world is inflamed. God forbid you burn a Quran or write a novel vaguely critical of the faith. And yet Muslims can destroy their own societies and seek to destroy the West, and you don't hear a peep. So it seems to me you really have to side with Israel here. You have one side which, if it really could accomplish its aims, would simply live peacefully with its neighbors. And you have another side which is seeking to implement a 7th century theocracy in the Holy Land. There's no peace to be found between these incompatible ideas. That doesn't mean you can't condemn specific actions on the part of the Israelis. And of course, acknowledging the moral disparity between Israel and her enemies doesn't give us any solution to the problem of Israel's existence in the Middle East. Again, granted, there is some percentage of Jews who are animated by their own religious hysteria and their own prophecies. Some are awaiting the Messiah on contested land. Yes, these people are willing to sacrifice the blood of their own children for the glory of God. But for the most part, they are not representative of the current state of Judaism or of the actions of the Israeli government. And it is how Israel deals with these people, their own religious lunatics, that will determine whether they can truly hold the moral high ground. And Israel can do a lot more than it has to disempower them. It can cease to subsidize the delusions of the ultra-Orthodox, and it can stop building settlements on contested land. The incompatible religious attachments to this land has made it impossible for Muslims and Jews to negotiate like rational human beings, and has made it impossible for them to live in peace. But the onus is still more on the side of the Muslims here. Even on their worst day, the Israelis act with greater care and compassion and self-criticism than Muslim combatants have anywhere ever. And again, you have to ask yourself, what do these groups want? What would they accomplish if they could accomplish anything? What would the Israelis do if they could do what they want? They would live in peace with their neighbors, if they had neighbors who would live in peace with them. They would simply continue to build out their high-tech sector and thrive. What do groups like ISIS and Al-Qaeda and even Hamas want? They want to impose their religious views on the rest of humanity. They want to stifle every freedom that decent and educated and secular people care about. This is not a trivial difference. And yet, judging from the level of condemnation that Israel now receives, you would think the difference ran the other way. This kind of confusion puts us all in danger. This is the great story of our time. For the rest of our lives, and the lives of our children, we're going to be confronted by people who don't want to live peacefully in a secular, pluralistic world, because they are desperate to get to paradise, and they're willing to destroy the very possibility of human happiness along the way. The truth is, we are all living in Israel. It's just that some of us haven't realized it yet.
There you go. As long as the shit are in charge of Israel, then they can commit genocide against the whole world. There you go. That was the episode that Sargon was referring to. What's up, Grant? How you doing? Oh, Grant, were you the one asking me about drones? No, but were you the one asking me about like the future of drones in warfare or something like that? Like were you asking my opinion on that? Somebody was. Who was asking me about that? That might have been, maybe that was Wampa. Was that you, Grant? Or maybe that was Wampa. Months ago? No, this was like a couple days ago somebody asked me about it. Maybe it was Wampa. Maybe it was Wampa. Well, either way, you know, this came out today.
We know why we were put here. We were brought here to rebuild the military, match capabilities to the threats of today. So while our adversaries have produced millions of cheap drones, before us, we were mired in bureaucratic red tape. Not anymore. In June, President Trump issued an executive order unleashing American drone dominance to bolster our drone industry and arm our warfighters, because that's what we're all about. So today, I'm rescinding restrictive policies that stifle production, and this will unleash American manufacturing and the ingenuity of our warfighters by doing three key things. First, we're going to bolster the U.S. drone manufacturing base by producing thousands of American-made products, prioritizing Buy American. We'll arm combat units with a variety of low-cost, American-crafted drones, leveraging our world-leading engineers and AI experts. And third, we're going to train as we expect to fight. Senior officers, well, I'll grab this if it's the memo. Senior officers must overcome bureaucratic risk aversion in budgeting, weaponing, weaponeering, and training. So here's the memo we're signing today, delivered via drones. Here on the front lawn of the Pentagon, with some of our great warfighters flying them. This is the future. We're in the fight. We're in the fight to win it. I'm never going to back out.
There you go. There you go. I talked months ago about an article regarding ChatGPT use in drones by DoD with Adderall, the military contract. Yeah, I've seen the Adderall. I've seen a lot of their stuff. They're that's like the new fucking oh god, what was that fucking company? Oh, Halliburton. But Adderall's like the new Halliburton, basically. We need a Casey to tell us why this is bad. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I haven't seen Casey on for a few days. I don't know what's going on. He's taking a break. Okay. Working with Palantir? Yeah, I remember when Palantir launched their launched on the are they on the NASDAQ? I don't know if they're on the NASDAQ. But I remember when they launched publicly, man, that was huge. I owned some stock with them for a while. I don't know if I don't think I lost money, but I don't think I made a lot of money buying their stock. But I remember when they went public, and it was a pretty big deal. Blah bitty blah. All right, I gotta go to bed. I gotta be up in a couple hours. Thank you, Grand Turbo, Conrad, Salty, Glock, Camel, Onion. I appreciate it. I'm gonna send you guys over to Grumple again. It's still going. No, it's not still going from last night, but he's been streaming for like almost 9 hours. So there's nobody else on except Kairos, and I know how you guys feel about Kairos. So some of you probably can't even go into Kairos stream because you're banned. But I'll probably be on later. You know, it's Friday, so I'm usually on Friday, Saturday. So we'll watch some stuff. We'll hang out. All right. Gay for pay, Kairos. Amazing, amazing. We gotta get a fucking we gotta get a talk with Kairos going. Last time I talked to him was in November. Right, it was on election night actually. I talked to him on Discord. We gotta get a chat with Kairos. It's been a while. All right, I'm out of here. I'll see you guys later. Peace.